Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Naria. It's such a pleasure for me to spend some time with you this morning, and I definitely want to second what both Naria and Kate said. Thank you for coming here, for those of you in the room. Thank you for joining us online, for those of you who are participating this way. This is a really important event for us. It is so great to be here with all of you. Because right now, when you wake up in the morning, let's be honest, it's a pretty tumultuous time. You know, I just think that when you look at history, there are some years that witness relatively little change, and yet there are some months where you see years worth of change in what feels like a few weeks. And I think in many ways, the first 3 months of 2025 have brought enormous change, and not all of it is easy for nonprofits, especially when you look at sources of funding. And so we realize what an important time this is. What I want to do this morning is talk about where technology fits in. Because after all, as you can imagine, this is really a conference about what technology can do for nonprofits. And so where I think I fit into the time that we have together is to share some perspective about technology and especially AI. What does it mean for nonprofits? But even more than that, how are we thinking about it at Microsoft? And let me start by putting it in the context of what economists think about. As economists think about technology, there's really two types of technology: a general purpose technology and a single purpose tool. Most technologies in the world are in fact single purpose tools. A light bulb, a smoke detector, a drill. They do one thing really, really well. But a general purpose technology, what economists call a GPT, is a technology that basically impacts the entire economy. Electricity is really the archetype. And when you think about it, every aspect of our economy runs on electricity. It changed everything. And interestingly, what historians have learned is that GPTs have really been the driving force of all of the industrial revolutions. The first industrial revolution started in England in the 1700s, and it was really driven by ironworking and the steam engine, but ironworking more than anything else. The second industrial revolution really took off more in the United States than anywhere else, and it was a combination of electricity and machine tools. Machine tools really built the modern manufacturing economy. And the third industrial revolution is really the story of our lives. It started with the computer chip, and when it was combined with software, it fueled a digital era. Now, interestingly, when people think about these industrial revolutions, and I find especially when you meet with people in government, they always think first and foremost about what it means to be at the frontier of the leading edge, the leading sector, like a GPU when you're thinking about AI. Those things matter, but what history teaches us is that what matters even more is not being the inventor of the leading edge, is what economists call diffusion. It's actually the use of technology as quickly and as broadly as possible. Or what economists call diffusion, we in the tech sector call adoption. And this makes great sense when you think about it, because after all, take electricity. If it can change every part of the economy, then the countries that benefit most are those that use it in every part of the economy. And you see this in the data. For example, this is the growth in electricity consumption on a per capita basis in the United States. As electricity consumption grew, GDP per capita grew as well. I have slides like this for basically every country on the planet, and they're all the same. The correlation is extraordinary. And what was true for electricity in the second industrial revolution also became true for digitization in the third industrial revolution. And this is something that we at Microsoft understand not only because we're interested in history and we read, but in a sense, this is actually our story as a company. Microsoft was founded on April 4th, 1975. If you look at the calendar, you realize that we'll have our 50th birthday a week from Friday. Yeah. But what's interesting when I look at the history of Microsoft, and as somebody who's been here for almost 32 years, in many ways, we are a software company and always have been, a technology company and have always been, but we're really a GPT diffusion company, a general purpose technology diffusion engine. The company's very first mission was defined by a young Bill Gates and Paul Allen and Steve Ballmer. It was about a computer on every desk and in every home running Microsoft software. Now, what I find most interesting about this first mission statement is there is one word in it that's used twice, the word every. And we fast forward almost 50 years to today, and the font in our mission statement has changed, but that same word is still used twice. Now we are about empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. Every is something that defines what we have always tried to do as a company, to bring technology to everyone. And in many ways, Microsoft is one of the companies that has served as the heart of, if you will, of this third industrial revolution. We'll celebrate our 50th birthday next Friday. It'll be fun, but really, it's always here about the future. Usually a year at a time, maybe 5 years at a time. But I do think we're at a moment when we can look forward more broadly and start to imagine collectively what might the second quarter of the 21st century bring. Well, one thing we believe is clear, even in a world with so much uncertainty, AI really is the next general purpose technology. You think about the problem on planet Earth, AI will serve a role in helping to solve it. It will impact every part of the economy. I do think it really is the electricity of our era. So the real question is, how do we as a company, really how do we as a community, think about what it will take to ensure that this new general purpose technology in fact serves the world well? Well, interestingly, the more we've thought about it, the more we've concluded there's actually 4 critical ingredients for success. And I want to talk about each of them briefly. Not surprisingly, it starts with the technology itself. It turns out that every GPT, every general purpose technology, is built with a technology stack, a stack of technologies that need to come together. And you can see this from electricity, really the GPT that's most familiar to most people in the world. It was 1878 when Thomas Edison first was able to use electricity to light a light bulb. And then it was 4 years later in Manhattan that for the first time there was a power plant that illuminated the lights in buildings. The very first building to light up was the New York Times building. I think that no one probably imagined in 1878, when Edison lit that first light bulb, that they were going to need to build an entire tech stack. But that's what was required. It started with the fuel to power the generators in the power plants. And then they needed to be connected with a grid that would reach every building and home that was using electricity. There needed to be transformers and circuit breakers built into the grid. There needed to be wiring and switches and circuit breakers. There needed to be appliances that actually made electricity useful. And then there were the new opportunities for manufacturers, for users. In effect, this became the tech stack for electricity, and it created a new economy because every layer of this tech stack had new businesses, new jobs, new skills that all needed to come together. But what I think is most interesting about this is the innovation that was unleashed, especially at what I would call the appliance layer. If you go to your home, when you leave this, or if you're watching online, you may be watching from home. If you look around your kitchen, if you look around your flat or apartment or house, almost everything you see will have been invented in the first 20 years after electricity took off in Lower Manhattan. Imagine what it must have felt like if it was a hot summer day and for the very first time you walked into a room that had an electric fan. Or imagine what life meant when you actually had a washing machine. Or in some ways, my favorite, imagine for the very first time walking into a kitchen that had a blender. I mean, what is this thing? It's loud, you know, and then you would realize how much easier it made it to prepare dinner. All of these things probably felt like magic. And in a sense, they were magical in terms of the impact they had on societies that could benefit from them. Well, it's no longer 1878 or 1882. Now it's 2025. And interestingly, AI is also being built on a tech stack. The tech stack fundamentally has three layers: the infrastructure layer, with the land and power and chips and data centers, the platform layer, and the counterpart to that appliance layer, the applications layer. And one of the things, really the heart of what we're doing at Microsoft from a technology perspective, is focusing on investing and innovating in all three layers. It starts with the infrastructure layer, which to me is just extraordinary. I love visiting data centers. At some level, they all look the same, and at some level, they're all different. I'm amazed by just the extraordinary amount of wiring and liquid cooling and the chips and basically the electrical engineers and electricians and the mechanical engineers and the pipe fitters. These really are, in many ways, the power plants of our time. The critical digital infrastructure on which AI relies. And we're building it around the world. We're spending $80 billion this year alone to build out this infrastructure. We're building it in more countries than any other company because you have to have the infrastructure so that AI can be put to work. But you can't stop there. It's then the platform layer that makes it possible to build applications that will put this infrastructure to work. So there's foundation models like a GPT-4 or a GPT-4o coming from a company like OpenAI, our critical partner. But we're in fact seeing many of these foundation models, some based on large investments in training, some being more focused, some being open source, but all of those are coming together. They're all trained with large amounts of data, but what really is the key at the platform layer is, in addition, a third layer, the platform level services. So what we're doing at Microsoft is thinking and working and investing and innovating in putting these three pieces together. There's all of the platform software components that we are building out, because these are the digital tools, or tool chain, as software developers now refer to it, that make it possible for people then to build applications on top that are infused with the power of AI. And so when you really look at what we're doing, and I think where we so closely connect with all of you, is the ability to support nonprofits around the world, and startups around the world, and large companies and governments around the world. It's really all of the people who will unleash innovation at the applications layer to put the power of AI to work to solve the world's problems. Now, all of this is like a giant flywheel, because in truth, it all has to get moving. You build the infrastructure so that you can train a model and deploy it around the world. You provide those models so that applications can be built on top. But you need the applications to take off, to become popular, to be used, to generate the revenue, to keep investing in the infrastructure. And like a giant flywheel, there are days when it all seems to work seamlessly and in symmetry, and most other days when there seems like there's more progress at one layer than another, and you're constantly focused, if you're at a place like Microsoft, in identifying each area. What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? What are the problems that need to be solved? 100 years from now, people will look back and say, oh, it must have been easy. Well, if you're in the heart of it, of course you appreciate that it's always hard. But that's the technology layer. Now, if the only thing we did as a technology company was master the technology, we would do a quarter of what is needed in order to build this new era of AI. So it's really combining the technology with these other things, starting with economics. Interestingly, every tech stack actually has an economic structure. And that's one of the really important things to always think about and understand. Because this is true of electricity, it's true of AI, it's been true of every general purpose technology. If you look at electricity, for example, what you see is that the power plants are enormously expensive. The power grid is enormously expensive. But the appliances, in contrast, are not. They were cheaper to invent and obviously much cheaper to manufacture or buy. Now, what is interesting is that fundamental economic structure of the second industrial revolution is in fact being repeated, because AI infrastructure is very expensive. And this is very different from, say, the third industrial revolution, when somebody like Michael Dell could really make enormous progress in taking the costs out of, call it the hardware layer, and help make personal computers within a few years cost a half or only a third of what they cost before. And then the software applications were built on top. But this era requires massive capital at the bottom in the infrastructure, even when the opportunities at the top remain much less expensive. Now, that economic structure actually translates into a financial architecture, because you can't build this tech stack without having a real vision and a strategy for the financial architecture that's needed. And you see Microsoft not only doing this in our own investments, it helps explain why you see headlines like the big capital funds coming together. For example, the one that BlackRock and Microsoft and MGX, and then more recently NVIDIA and xAI are all helping to raise, to generate even more capital, to help bring innovation to the entire supply chain of what is needed, and to help invest in all of this that needs to be built around the world. In fact, interestingly enough, I think we're seeing this financial architecture evolve before our eyes as well. It starts with the big investments by private companies. It then has this private capital. It has investments by sovereign wealth funds. And I do believe that we are likely to need other public funding as well to fill in the gaps, especially on a continent like Africa, where those gaps are real, and you reach the limits of what makes sense for private capital, the private market, to invest in. And then the last piece of this economic aspect is really the business model. It turns out that you always need stable, oftentimes innovative business models. That's what sustainable success is built upon. And when you think about digital technology, it always comes down to one of three business models. The first is a subscription. It's like subscribing to a magazine. You pay once and you can read one story a week. You can read every story in every issue if that's what you want. That is, in fact, M365 that we offer. You know, somebody can buy a subscription and they can use every feature. Very few people do. They can use only one application, but that is the way a subscription works. Then there's consumption. That's the way the cloud services work, including Azure. People pay for the amount they use, and in effect, they pay as they go. And then there's advertising. And advertising has really emerged, as you all know, as really being at the heart of many consumer-based digital services. People may get up and look at Instagram in the morning and they'll never pay for it, but obviously advertising is what is paying for that service to exist. To me, the most interesting thing is just to recognize business models will evolve. We don't yet know what they're going to look like a decade from now. And I think the most interesting story, if you look at the history of general purpose technologies, is how they evolved for electricity. Electricity grew first in the United States, as I mentioned, and interestingly enough, the person who was the leader of basically the company that Thomas Edison had founded was visiting the UK, visiting England, where he was born and had grown up. And at the time, in Chicago, where he lived, you could still walk down a street. This was in the 1890s. Electricity had been around for 15 years at that point. And you would see some stores and some homes that were clearly lit and others that were still running on kerosene. People were still slow to adopt it. But this gentleman spent a weekend in Brighton on the beach on the south coast of England. And when he arrived, he walked down the street and every store was lit by electricity. And he wondered, what's going on here? What have these people figured out that we have not figured out in Chicago or the United States? So he found the manager of the local power plant. And what he did was he showed him an invention. It was called a power meter. It was what was put in every store so that people were not paying on a subscription basis as they were in Chicago, but paying on a consumption basis instead. It turned out for the first 15 years of electricity in the United States, when you bought a light bulb, you bought a subscription so that you could turn it on. It turned out that once the business model evolved to consumption, it became far easier for people to go buy more light bulbs and just pay the bill at the end of the month. I love that story because I think the real lesson is not just about business models, it's about humility. Every industrial revolution is led by people who, frankly, not only are really smart, but they think they're really smart. And the real lesson is that nobody knows everything. We all are going to learn together as we go through this. And that is, in part, how we'll master the economics that will be needed for success. Now, the third key ingredient you might look at, and sometimes people do, and say, well, I'm surprised that this rate rises to the same level, skilling. Why is that as important as economics and technology? Well, it turns out that skilling is the fundamental force that drives the adoption and growth of each of these industrial revolutions. It makes sense. Because if a new technology is going to be used across the economy, the skills to put it to work need to be mastered across the economy. So why did ironworking take off in England? It wasn't just because George Watt had invented the steam engine there. It was because England at the time had a system of technical institutes and apprenticeships that taught people in the evening how to master ironworking, and so ironworking spread more quickly. The US benefited from this amazing coincidence when it came to electricity and machine tooling, because in 1862, during the Civil War in the United States, Abraham Lincoln had championed and then signed into law what became known as land-grant colleges. The federal government granted federal land to the states to create land-grant colleges. I'm sure some of you have degrees from them. And it was all started to really advance an understanding of agricultural science and agricultural engineering, but it led to this new discipline in the United States called mechanical engineering. And so because the United States had mechanical engineers, they were able to figure out how to put machine tools to work to change manufacturing across the economy. And then when the industry standardized, they were able to go even faster. And the same thing was true in the third industrial revolution. Interestingly, employers invested in training of employees in the 1980s, and computer science departments absolutely swept the nation in the United States. All the major colleges and universities created these computer science departments. So the US had more people who could code on a per capita basis than any other country. And people have learned over time that this need for skilling is not just deep, it is broad. One of the best illustrations of this was what the electricity industry realized in the 1950s. They had built out power plants, but electricity was not being used as widely as the industry hoped. So the industry got together and said, you know what we need to do? We need to help the American public actually just learn what a new generation of appliances can do in their homes. We need to bring this into people's homes using the power of television. We have to find somebody who can connect with the public and help them learn about this in an interesting and even enjoyable way. So they found this fellow who was working in Las Vegas at the time. He was an actor. He wasn't well known at the time, but he had this natural ability not only to communicate, but to connect. His name was Ronald Reagan. And so Ronald Reagan, with his wife Nancy, started to come to everyone's home every Sunday evening when GE would host basically a theater, a play that evening. But before it began, Ronald and Nancy would show off the latest appliance in their home. They ended up with so many appliances in their home that they needed to put in place an additional electrical generator just to power all of it. But it worked. And it probably was indispensable in the rest of his career, including becoming president of the United States. It shows how skilling needs to connect with people. I think one of our great opportunities and challenges as a company, as a community, as an industry, really as a planet, is to think about AI skilling at scale and make it one of the great opportunities and causes together for the next decade and two to come. And it really starts by understanding, thinking about what are the skills that people need to learn. And we should recognize these are early days. We don't yet know exactly what we're going to need. But we do think there are at least three categories. There's fluency, just learning how to use AI, learning how to use a Copilot or ChatGPT or in other everyday software applications. That is what we are doing. That's what we are doing in partnership with many of you. It is a little bit like what Ronald Reagan did. We just haven't hired Ronald Reagan yet. The next is AI engineering. I think this is the future of computer science. The real question is, what will a computer science degree look like a decade from now? Will it be an AI science degree? What will people need to learn in order to really create AI applications? There's a good chance it will involve less code because AI is getting very adept at coding, but an enormous amount of design and probably, I think, more multiple disciplines because people need to really master all of the impacts of AI and how to make them more useful. And then there's what we think about as AI systems design. If you're an organizational leader, how do you understand your workflows, what we would think of as your business processes? Which ones are most likely to benefit from the application of AI? How do you measure the success? How do you take people through cultural change? And in effect, every country is going to need to develop its own national AI talent strategy, assessing their economy, looking at the different sectors. Where are there real needs for skilling and what type? Where is there the ability to partner, often with nonprofits, and definitely through the education sector, to build AI fluency for everyone and build out all of the other skills that are needed? All of these things will need to come together to master skilling. And then you have the final piece. It's what historians and political and social scientists call social acceptance. It turns out that broad technology adoption requires social acceptance. It sort of makes sense when you think about it, but in the 1980s, social scientists went to work, sociologists in particular, and they asked a very important question. Why did some technologies take off and get used broadly when others did not? And it turned out that their studies showed it always came down to two factors. First, something needed to be useful. Unless it was useful, people wouldn't use it. That seems obvious, but the other is that it had to be trusted. And I think it's this element of trust that is also at the heart of what we need to advance when it comes to AI. And that's what we're doing. And as we think about trust, we see these four elements. There's security, there's privacy, there's digital safety, I'd say especially the protection of children and others, and there's this discipline called responsible AI that has emerged in the industry and has really spread around the world, including through oftentimes new laws and regulations. And just as there's a tech stack for the technology itself, there's sort of a stack that we're building for AI governance. There's an architecture. I think it starts with the internal policies at tech companies. We have now corporate standards in these places for these topics. We train engineers, we have engineering tools, we have compliance systems. And the same is true for customers, whether they're nonprofits or companies or governments. But I think on top of that, we're seeing emerge industry standards. The standards are critical because they define best practices. And as best practices emerge, there's the foundation for, say, the domestic policy, ultimately the international policies that are needed. This, too, needs to come together in order for AI to spread around the world. And because this is 2025 and not 1882, we have to add an element to this aspect for social acceptance called environmental sustainability. Because it does turn out, as everyone knows, that those big data centers that you saw the pictures of run on a large amount of electricity, which is why we're so focused and why we remain so committed to achieving in 2030 the goals we set for ourselves in 2020, to be carbon negative by the end of this decade. And what that means is reducing our emissions from electricity and from the use of greener steel and greener concrete and greener fuels and the like, and then engaging in carbon removal. It is what has made Microsoft the largest corporate investor on the planet of the removal of carbon from the environment. So that's how we achieve, we believe, social acceptance. What I think is most interesting about this is to be truly successful, you actually have to do not one of those four things. You have to do all four of them at the same time. And I do think that what perhaps differentiates us from, say, other tech companies more than anything else, it's the fact that we are working so hard to master all four of these things together. And you're going to see new initiatives, new innovations, and new investments in the coming months, in the next year, in all four of these areas. I would then conclude by just offering a thought about what the history of technology teaches us. I'd first start with the cautionary tale. It goes back to electricity. I actually believe that the diffusion of electricity was both remarkable and at the same time represents the single greatest technology tragedy in history. What is the tragedy? It's the fact that today we come together 143 years after that power plant started operating in Manhattan, and there are still 700 million people on planet Earth that tonight won't be able to use electricity to light a light bulb because they don't have access to it. It's 43% of the people who live in Africa. I think that the #1 cause of the great global divide between the global north and the global south, the economic divide that has afflicted so many now generations of people's lives, has fundamentally been based on whether they lived in a place that had access to electricity. We need to do better. Let's face it, if it takes 150 years to bring AI to the world, then we will have failed. Our goal, I think, needs to bring AI to the world, not in 150 years, but in 15. That is the opportunity that we have to think anew and act differently. And then what it asks us to do is think about how we work together. Because you're at Microsoft, I would start with the purpose of a company. Satya Nadella, our CEO, likes to quote a professor named Colin Mayer, who said, the purpose of a company is to find profitable solutions to the world's problems. I fundamentally believe that every healthy society is built on a healthy three-legged stool. There are governments that obtain money by taxing it, and they spend money to solve the world's problems. They create the fundamental social infrastructure needed for a civilized society. And then you have nonprofits that raise money to solve the world's problems. And then you have companies that sell products and services to earn a profit to solve the world's problems. And what is most interesting in the world today, in my view, is that while people often spend their time talking about how we're different, what we don't talk about is how we do our best work, not just as separate organizations, but in communities and countries when we all complement each other, because that is what we do. So in sum, we know our role well. It is to pursue profitable solutions to the world's problems, mostly by building out that infrastructure layer, building out the platform layer, so you can go to work, as can we, with applications that will make the world a better place. In essence, our role is to serve you. At Microsoft, we serve the world's nonprofits so you can serve the world. And when we do that together, even in a hard day, a hard month, or a hard year, we make the world a better place. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. What a beautiful video. We're so grateful for your partnership. And before I get started, we just recognize you have a lot to do. Thank you for coming to Seattle. Today, if Brad zoomed out and gave you a big picture, I want to zoom in and I want to talk about the last 4 months. The last 4 months have been an absolutely pivotal time when it comes to the power of AI. And so I want to just zoom in and talk about two really big ideas. First, I'm going to call digital labor. Now, the term is still emerging right now, but I'm going to assert something that I think is really important with the rise of the new, what we call reasoning models. And I'll talk more about these in a moment. We now have AI, I'm going to assert to you, that can perceive, understand, summarize, identify patterns, create reasoned plans, solve problems, think analytically, make decisions even, as well or better than humans? You'll have to suspend disbelief for just a moment. I'll show you some data points, but I'm going to assert that. And then the second big idea that really has come to the forefront over this last 4-month period, so starting in December, is that we can now package those things up into modules that the industry, the world, is calling AI agents. And for our purposes today, for the demos that we'll do, an agent is a system that combines perception, cognition, and action to perform a task or a job that we previously needed a human because of its complexity to perform. Now, you may not believe these two things, so let me at least show you 3 data points that I think are very compelling. These are 3 benchmarks that have recently been cleared by the latest models from OpenAI, who continues to be the leader in this field. We've had LLMs, large language models, now for about 2 years, a little over 2 years since we saw ChatGPT hit the scene. But over the last 4 months, we have been introduced to what we now call reasoning models, models that can analytically reason, that have been trained in different ways. So let's take a look at these 3 benchmarks. The first is called the GPQA, the graduate level Google Proof Q&A test. It's meant to be very difficult for both humans and AI. You can see that PhDs with access to the internet, they get on average about 1/3 of the questions right outside of their specialty. Within their specialty, they get about 80% of the questions right. Well, the latest model, called O3 from OpenAI, achieved 87% on the GPQA, beating human experts for the first time. The next one has to do with what we have known for a couple of years now has been a weak spot in LLMs, and that is math and analytical thinking. This is called frontier math. It's a set of very difficult math problems created by mathematicians to be incredibly hard to solve for anyone. Indeed, no AI had ever scored over 2%, as you see here, until O3, again, in the last 60 days, got 25% right. Now, it's not 100%, but you can see the trajectory. The final baseline and benchmark we'll look at is an AGI, or a generalized intelligence benchmark. And this ARC-AGI, as you can see here, is a famous test. It's a very fluid intelligence test that's meant to be easy for people but difficult for machines. But again, O3, taking this test, beat all previous AIs and for the first time beat the baseline human level on the test, scoring an 87.5. What's more impressive is we don't see things leveling off. We have not hit diminishing returns yet as we continue to see these reasoning models go. So we could talk a long time about these things, but now I want to translate this into what I'm seeing in the field as I work with customers from all sorts of different walks of life, and talk to you about how things have evolved over the last 2 years. First, the LLMs, starting about 2 years ago when we introduced Copilot, were focused on what I will call a scenario of personal productivity. The name Copilot is meant to indicate that this is an assistant that is designed to help you save time. And indeed, it continues to very well. Today, we feel great about someone who is Copilot aware being able to save 20, 30, sometimes in excess of 40 hours a month. This is truly tremendous, we think, progress for this scenario. But we didn't stop there. Over the last year or so, we've been very focused on building that out to help organizations do what we call process redesign. You heard a little bit of that in the nonprofit that was on before me. Looking at an end-to-end process like matching, thinking about how that process works and then streamlining it, taking out waste and inserting AI where you can to move things forward. Now, as I work with companies to do this, we are focused often on just going across the general functions of an organization, things like customer service or finance or marketing, where we see that there's incredible opportunity for process redesign. In fact, in the companies that I work with, we're seeing millions, sometimes tens of millions, in the extreme cases, hundreds of millions of dollars of savings as they do process redesign with AI, particularly with AI agents. But the thing that has changed most in the last 4 months has been the emergence of a new class, if you will, a new scenario in organizations that I will just simply call digital labor. It is that without redesigning your processes and independent of what an individual does for his or her job, that you can actually start to augment your capabilities and your capacity with agents that act like humans, that can actually do the work you otherwise would have outsourced to humans or brought humans in or had to pay for humans to do. And it is these 3 classes, personal productivity, digital labor, and process redesign, that represent kind of the cutting edge of how organizations all across the world are now starting to employ the great technology, especially the great technology of the reasoning models over these last 4 months. All right, so let's go from here into how all this is playing out right now. Well, we can't always predict the future, but because the future is often with us but unevenly distributed, this slide represents probably the very best articulation, the very best summary I can give you of where our organization's going, regardless of whether you're for-profit or not-for-profit. These are the levels, the stages of AI transformation that we're seeing. Most organizations start on the left-hand side with a human plus, in our case, a co-pilot, another agent meant to help them get their job done. Over time, we see humans having multiple agents. You'll see that in some of the demos where they can use these agents to get things done. And then you start to see a big leap as we move into level 3 and level 4. You actually see in the first case, AI agents running entire teams of other agents. So with human oversight, AI agents running teams to take care of processes or of deliverables. And then finally, the stage that we see right now, kind of in its infancy, is agent first entirely over entire departments or functions with human oversight. This is how it's developing. And it's developing this way because of that digital labor concept I introduced in the beginning. Today, we truly have models that can think, reason, solve problems, make decisions as well or better than humans. It's moving so very fast. Now, what do you do about this? How do you kind of take advantage of these things? Well, from our perspective, we have a vision of where this is all going. We would say it this way. In every organization of every type all around the world, we believe that people will have a co-pilot. That co-pilot will be a digital assistant and understand them, understand what they're trying to accomplish, understand the context of the organization that they work in, the context of the industry or the mission. But that's not enough. We've learned over the last 2 years that's not enough. You also have to add a set of agents, agents that can help people to use their co-pilot to get more done. In a rough analogy, we would say it this way. In the mobile world, there was the smartphone and there were apps. You added apps to a smartphone to modularly add capabilities. Well, in this world, the AI era, there's a co-pilot and there are agents. You add agents to modularly add capabilities to your co-pilot so that it can do things like accounts receivable or marketing or donor communications in ways that it couldn't do without specialized information, knowledge, or expertise. Now, at Microsoft, we're trying to do two things. We're trying to create Copilot as what we would call a UI for AI, and then create a platform for AI makers so that you can go make, manage, govern all of those agents that soon will be an important part of the way you run your organization. In January, we introduced a new product, one that I think will be particularly interesting for this audience. It's called Copilot Chat. It combines really three things. First is a very important value prop. It's free. Free, secure AI chat that is based on GPT-4o and web grounded. We'll see this in just 2 seconds. It is always free. It is one of the best ways to raise the AI capability and skill level of your organization. You can get started with this today. It's free. It also offers IT controls, like what we call enterprise data protection and governance controls. And if you would like, you can introduce agents on a pay-as-you-go or consumption basis in the middle. But you get to determine whether or not you want to turn that on. This, for us, is a great leveler. This is something that we have done to essentially, as we think of what Brad was saying, to raise the skill level all across the world of people that we think should start to interact with AI. Now, why don't we just take a moment, and I'd love to just show you this in action so you can see what can Copilot Chat do for you, what's possible. So this is Copilot Chat, the free, secure, GPT-4o, web-grounded product that we talked about earlier. I'm going to stay in that web environment right here, and I'm just going to do a couple of quick things. First, I'm just going to show you what it looks like when you ask Copilot Chat something that it already knows about. In this case, I'm going to ask it how a graphics processing unit or GPU works. I'll send that query, that prompt in, and you'll see it does something that is very important. Using its own training, it gives me a great response back, just like something like ChatGPT would. And it summarizes as well. A GPU or graphics processing unit has, for instance, parallel processing, shaders, memory, a rendering pipeline, and I can continue to ask questions. You'll see that there are no references here because this pulled entirely on the model itself. It didn't need to refer to anything else. Now, let's take a look and see when I ask it a little bit more complex question. I'm going to come here, and just so you don't have to watch me type all this out, we'll ask What can you tell me about what's called model distillation in the context of training LLMs? You might know nothing about this. Very few of people in the world did before DeepSeek. But DeepSeek taught us all about model distillation. And it's a new method of essentially building or constructing an LLM. You'll see it's a technique used to transfer knowledge from a large, complex model, it says, the teacher, to a smaller, more efficient model, the student. You'll see that it explains how it works, but what's more, if we come down to the bottom, you'll see that it actually has gone out to the web, found information on this topic, and summarized it using the model. So its own knowledge combined with the knowledge on the web, complete with a reference so I can see what's happening. But it doesn't stop here. I can also query specific data. So as an example, I just wanted to quickly show you this Excel spreadsheet. It's very straightforward. This is the type of thing you'd see for just about any organization. It's transactions with a transaction ID, a category for each transaction, revenue, the number of units, the spend, the region. It's not very long for our demo purposes. It's just a couple, about 50 lines long, but this can be as long as you want it to be. Let me just cut out of this so I can actually use it. I'll go back over to Copilot Chat, and I'll actually upload that file. There it is. And it will take a moment, and then I will ask it a question. I'll ask this. How many fast chargers were sold in the West region? We'll give it a second to reply. You'll see it says executing task because it's pulling on a skill inherent within Copilot Chat. We called that code generation, and it says that there were 330 units. Now, we might want to ask it something like this. Can you explain how you came up with that answer? It'll take a moment and process it, and it'll give us a sense of exactly what it did. It says, sure, I extracted the data, I filtered the data, I summed the units, and here are the specific entries from that spreadsheet. It gives me 330. What you're starting to see is not just regurgitation or summary, you're starting to see logical, analytical thought. In this case, it's using code behind the scenes to do something that's pretty complex. The free product, everything I've shown you is free, can be used to do just about all of the tasks that someone would do every day, and to even focus on the files and data that is within your organization. Everything that's uploaded to Copilot Chat is secure. It's kept within a boundary of what we call the tenant, where, for instance, if you're using M365 today, your email or your team's messages are started. Let's do one last thing as we switch over to show you a little bit more about Copilot Chat. I'm going to ask it this question. Still in the web scope, can you help me get ready for my day? Now here in the web scope, it's going to say, sure, here's what I'd recommend. Check your schedule, prepare your workspace, set your goals, healthy start. I mean, things that someone with no context of what I was doing would want to, would give me. I'm going to switch over now to what's called the work scope. And in the work scope, all of a sudden I give Copilot Chat access to all of my work data, my calendar, my emails, everything like that. And I'll ask the same question. Can you help me get ready for my day? In this case, we'll ask about tomorrow. Now what it's going to do is go in and check the calendar, and you'll see that it will find something more than just generic, prepare the workspace. It's going to find all sorts of things that are on my calendar. And you'll see I have travel that starts at 6:45. I've got some other events that I'll be speaking at, a CHRO discussion goes in, and I can even go back and look at some of those specifics. You'll see as an example, here are some additional relevant emails and files. And I can ask about specifics. I can come in and say, sure, can you help me get ready for that CHRO event? And it will go in deep now and pull out a whole bunch of different data. I had a meeting on this that was recorded. There were some prep documents that my team has put together for me. It will find all of that, and in relation to that particular calendar entry, it will give me everything I need. An event overview. This is really my stuff, by the way. This isn't a demo. It is a demo, but it's my stuff in the demo. And it gives me a great view of key details you can see, including links, the meeting structure and agenda, additional resources. I mean, just like an assistant, it helps me get ready for things. Now, in the interest of time, I want to show you just a couple more demos, so I'm going to go on and frame a couple of things. But what you're seeing here is Copilot Chat really start to become an interface for all the work that we expect employees to do. This is an example of a person using an agent, a special agent. Special agent, that's interesting. A very a very unique agent, we'll say, that can help you to get your job done. All right, let's switch over for a moment and talk a little bit more about that second part of our value prop, because here I want to show you some really interesting demos. That part of the value prop, as we move over from Copilot Chat, has to do with a platform for AI makers, and specifically a platform in which you can build, obtain, and use agents. Again, we think of Copilot kind of like a smartphone. It's good. It does amazing things, but it can't do everything. So as you add more capabilities, you do so by adding modules, and we call those modules agents. So let's talk a little bit about what we do. Our platform solution for you, for the whole world, is called Copilot Studio. It is a no-code or low-code platform that allows even end users to start to build their own agents. You can build a very simple agent literally in 5 to 6 minutes by pointing it at a SharePoint repository that has content in it and giving it instructions and telling it what to do. You can also, though, build very sophisticated agents. Makers can build these sophisticated agents that are incredibly sophisticated in what they can do. We think of it this way. Agents for us range from what we call retrieval, prompt and response agents, all the way over to autonomous, where you start to get very sophisticated use cases, where these agents can act on their own under the direction or being overseen by a human. Now for this, I want to show you a couple of these. In this one, I'm actually going to rewind if the sound doesn't work for you, but I'm going to show you one of my favorite agents created by the team. This agent actually inserts itself into Teams, and it's called the interpreter agent. And what happens here happens so fast that I need to explain it just for a moment. This particular agent actually sits up in the cloud, and you'll see us configure it in just a moment. These are really my teammates. They recorded this so that I could show it to you. They're going to go in and configure this agent, turn it on, and tell it what language they would like to hear the spoken words being translated or interpreted into. Now, at the bottom there, you'll see a member of my team who speaks Spanish, native Spanish. He's going to speak in Spanish. The coolest thing about this agent is it sends the data up to the cloud, but at the same time it does that, it samples the individual's voice and then will give us his voice back in the target language. So you actually hear him, but speaking a language that he may or may not speak. So the first click here, we'll just show you how you set this up. You come over to language and speech, you turn on the interpreter agent, you choose the interpretation language. So we're going to choose to hear English. And then we tested the audio backstage, and so I hope this comes up. Here we go.
Necesitamos revisar el progreso del proyecto. ¿Pueden por favor decirnos cómo van las tareas? We've reviewed the progress of the project. Can you please tell us how the tasks we should take are going?
It's incredible. It's incredible. I speak Chinese and learned as a kid. But it was still hard, even as a kid. But a couple of months ago, we ran this. I was like, Nicole, she's a woman on my team. I was like, Nicole, come do this with me. And I said, I just want to hear you speak Chinese. And we ran this thing, and Nicole was speaking Chinese. It was absolutely, like, in her voice, speaking Mandarin Chinese to me. I had never seen anything like it. Now, there is a lag, by the way. You saw that there's a little bit of a lag. There's roughly about a 5-second lag, because it's got to go to the cloud, samples the voice, it comes back down. But increíble is what I'd say. Like, it is incredible. Okay, now we're going to switch over to another type of agent as I finish up the presentation and just show you 2 agents we just announced last night from a stage in Seoul. Our CEO, Satya Nadella, was there. We've been prepping the world for these. These are going to be game changers. For the first agent, I need to explain what's going on. These are our first digital labor agents. The first one is called Researcher. What we essentially did was take the O3, the most advanced model from OpenAI, and we did what's called reinforcement learning post-training. That's a fancy way of saying we took its smarts, its reasoning, and then we showed it how to do the work of a particular type of job. And in this case, it would be an associate researcher, someone that would go and crawl across data sources at the speed of light and pull stuff back together. Let me just show you how this works. We'll start first by going to Select Researcher up at the top right. This is the interface that you get. Then you can enter in a prompt. This is built on kind of some of the deep reasoning stuff you will have seen from ChatGPT. You can see it's a fairly long prompt. It's develop a product strategy for us to enter the outdoor and adventure market. And here we tell it, use all the existing data you have on to get a sense of our potential place in the market, and do your own external research to connect our potential strategy with the broader market. So you're giving the instructions like you would a human. Then what you'll see next is the beginning of a real change in how these agents will function. Researcher thinks and gives this back. I understand you'd like a product strategy to make sure I fully grasp your needs. Oh, how I wish every direct report did this. I have just a couple of quick clarifications, and it asks some questions about scope and format. Let me know if you'd like to go ahead with just my best judgment. And we can respond here, and so we'll say, hey, let me scope, I want a higher level strategic plan format in between. It's gotta be easy and readable by my execs. Off it goes. Now, what is so cool about these agents is they don't just go off and work in a corner. They actually tell you first what they're going to do, and then they start to do it, and you can observe them as they do it. It is important to note here, though, that they don't come back in 20 seconds. Sometimes this will take a few minutes, sometimes it will take 10 minutes, sometimes it will take 20 minutes. It's really going off like a person would do, but it's doing its tasks at the speed of light, which makes it very different. See here, it's starting to tell us what it's doing, and now we get the output. The output is given to me as a report. You see this on the right side. This is literally, this isn't faked. This is the real report that comes up. We'll just run through the report so you can see what it looks like. At this point, I've stopped asking for folks who are junior on the team to do research projects for us, because as we've been using it over the last couple of weeks, first got my hands on it, man, it's starting to prove to change the way we work. The first time I have used digital labor in a way that I really feel like, man, that's gonna truly change how the work flows in the organization. That's a post-trained model focused on a particular job, in this case, research, which is very valuable. Now I want to show you one last post-trained model. This one blew my mind the first time I see it. Every time I show it to customers, I'm still like, man, what year is it? Like, where are we? It's a post-trained model with reinforcement learning, but it is, in this case, optimized for data, and optimized for data in Excel workbooks. So what it does, and here it's going to go through, and we'll just show you the Excel workbook. This is a little bit longer than the data set I showed you previously, so we'll just go through it. You can see this is monthly recurring revenue by customer, that second tab, and a customer list along with customer IDs. It's just a bunch of data. You'd have to make sense of this as a human analyst to figure out what's going on. This analyst has been trained with chain of thought inputs to understand how to make sense of large, complex data sets. So we're going to go over first to the analyst agent. We will pull it up. We will then enter in. First, we'll point it to the place that we want it to look at, and that will be the data set. Same type of thing you saw me before with Copilot Chat, but in this case now with advanced reasoning is the way to think about it. Then I'll enter in something that is a kind of pretty amorphous description of what I want to do. Can you look at the data I've shared and give me insights on customer segments along with a graph to visualize? I might say that to, a data analyst. And then I set it off to do its work. Now in this case, it will also show me what it's up to. It will analyze the file data. You'll see it working, importing the data. And I just love this part. Like I could sit here and watch this forever and ever because it literally is thinking. It goes through, as you can see, the sheet structure, the sheets. It thinks about how to map clusters. It can go in and out of blind alleys as it explores things, coming back up. And right now, the model I have is a little bit more behind the scenes than what you see here. It talks to itself. It says, well, that didn't work. Let me go back and check something else. It's really incredible. Continues to motor on. Here it's working through the visualization. And what's happening in the background here is that it's using the same skill I was showing kind of in the wild a moment ago, but it is essentially writing Python code in the background. So as we watch this come up, we can actually expand any one of these steps to see the code that it wrote, and then you can see on what's labeled as dev box there what came out. So it's kind of talking to itself, reasoning, and using a skill of writing and executing the code to actually make this all happen. Now to watch it complete here, we'll go through and it will complete the tasks. Gives me, in this particular case, just a view of those segments. So you can see a growth segment, a term distribution, region distribution, and then finally it will give me a visualization because it can plot. It can do anything that you can do with Python code. And so it can pull things together in a way that is really, really powerful. We'll just take a look as we end up here. And we'll zoom out for a second. You can see what it can do. The first two agents in our ecosystem now applied, to jobs that humans would do, but in a digital labor type of way. Okay, so let me just sum it all up. The last 4 months have been absolutely critical. 2 years ago, we were astounded by the fact that these LLMs could do language. Now they're starting to be able to pick up post-trained specific skills that can replace, in a digital labor format, what humans can do. To be clear, I'm not standing on a stage to tell you that means the end of humans. I'm not going to tell you there are data analysts who are going to have hat in hand at the street corner saying, you know, put out of work by data analysts by Microsoft. We don't think that at all. We think there are more problems to solve than there are people to solve them. We think there's more work to be done than you can afford and I can afford. We see this adding capacity to the world so that you can do more of what you want to do as you work on your mission, so that we can do more to solve the most pressing problems of humanity. I'll end where I started. We are so grateful that you have spent your time with us today. What a journey we're on. Brad gave you the broad arc of where we are. If you zoom in on the last 4 months alone, you start to see technology that clearly is going to change the economy, organizations, jobs, education, governments, just about everything, every structure we use to organize people and to get things done. We can't wait to go solve the world's problems with you. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. So great to see you. For those that I've not yet met or we haven't gotten a chance to say hello, my name is Nick Cain. I'm the Vice President of Strategy and Innovation at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. The Patrick J. McGovern Foundation is a global philanthropy focused solely at the intersection between AI and social impact. We're a team of grant makers, certainly. That is a topic that we're going to talk about today, funding. But we're more than that as an institution. We're also a team of community builders, of learning specialists, of strategists, and also of technologists. We're really proud to have a team of data scientists and engineers actually on staff at PJMF, working to build AI solutions and directly advise nonprofits on their use and development of technology. And we're all working together, right, in pursuit of our shared purpose, building a thriving, equitable, and sustainable future for all. I imagine that purpose is actually one that might sound familiar. There's maybe some words that sit in the value statements of your organizations, one that we're all pursuing together. So I think it's worth starting by just kind of answering the question, why AI? Why is AI the lever that we've chosen to focus on as an institution for a number of years now? In fact, well before ChatGPT and generative AI really thrust AI back into the public conversation in such a meaningful way. I think there's a couple answers to that question. First, of course, is that we believe deeply in the power of AI solutions to drive, when put in the right hands and applied to the right problems, to drive transformative impact. For a regional food bank to be able to use a machine learning model to more effectively determine when and how to distribute food to local food pantries in their communities. For a global conservation organization to use satellite data and a machine learning model to better identify which parcels of land specifically are best suited for ecosystem restoration or rewilding, just to give a couple of examples. But I think the more important answer to that question is that AI is actually an entry point into a bunch of much bigger and important conversations and questions about our society. Especially now, especially in the world we're living in today, a conversation about AI is actually a conversation about power. A conversation about AI is a conversation about equity and access. It's an opportunity to interrogate the world we've built and think about what kind of institutions and values and governance structures we want to build for the future as we lean into what I think will be an AI-enabled future. That's really the question that motivates us, and I like to kind of illustrate why this principle matters so much to us with an anecdote. Just last year, I got on a call with a for-profit climate startup, actually, and they shared with me that they'd developed a new machine learning model that they were really, really excited about because it was going to dramatically improve the ability to forecast water scarcity at kind of a local and regional level. And they say, we're working with clients all over the world to help them understand how water scarcity may affect their operations and their ability to do their jobs. They shared, for example, we've got a brewer that does some work in northern Mexico, an area that is generally pretty arid. And we think we have a sense for, when water scarcity may put their business at risk. And I said, that's really, really great. Congratulations. I'm curious, do you have some thoughts about how you might be able to share some of those predictions with the broader community that's surrounding that brewery? The community that depends on that water system for their livelihoods, to cook, to clean, to water their gardens, and generally live dignified lives. You may imagine what followed was a bit of an awkward pause, a bit of a shrug of the shoulders and say, look, that would be great. We agree that's important. We're busy, we got to make money, and not sure when we're going to get to that, basically. I'm not naive. I know why that was the answer to the question. I think the point is, I'm not satisfied with the answer, and I think we as an institution are not satisfied with that being the answer to that question. I think that's the motivation why we believe this conversation in this community, really engaging with AI, becoming builders and adopters and users of AI, is so critical. So how do we bring folks along on the AI journey? Well, one thing we do is, I think it's helpful to kind of take stock. Where is this community in their pathway on an AI journey? We partnered with our friends at Microsoft last year to just do a little bit of a point-in-time survey and research to answer that question. It was a global survey. We spoke to about 1,000 nonprofit professionals around the world, a nice mix of both roles and entities working in different domains and geographies. And we learned a handful of things that I thought would be helpful to tee up our conversation today. First is that organizations that were further along in their AI journeys were more likely to kind of report a positive sentiment toward the technology. This may seem somewhat straightforward or obvious, depending on your perspective, but I think it really emphasizes a point that I like to make often, which is that it's really only in context of your work, a specific application, a specific need or problem that you're trying to solve, where the promise of these tools and potentially some of the actual concerns or risks that may be relevant to your work become apparent. And generally, as that process progresses, that sentiment of positivity and excitement tends to grow. Second was that when presented with sort of a broad set of use cases and kind of asked, what excites you most about the potential for AI? Data analysis and predictive analytics were the ones that consistently across both groups, leadership and staff, said, this is what we need this for. I like this because I think it really speaks to the core potential of these tools. Underneath a lot of the more flashy use cases, which I think have a lot of value as well, is really just the ability to take a lot of data and make sense of it, to pull patterns out of it, and to help us be better at our jobs and in service of our communities, thanks to those insights. So I was excited to see that come through in the survey. And finally, we know that all these organizations, even those that were pretty early in their journey, 70% of those who said we're really early still in our journey, and a full 93% of those that were advanced, that we're really starting to adopt these tools, said we're already ready to start investing in our tech stack to help us do more. Investment is an important word choice here, right? It comes to the topic of the day. How do you pay for that? We know that sound technology use and innovation comes with certainly great planning, great strategy, but ultimately requires dollars. And so as invested as we are in helping nonprofits move along in their journey, we're also very interested in helping unlock more capital to flow out from philanthropy to help you do this critical work. What we've observed is that by and large, with a handful of exceptions, our good friends at the Omidyar Network, first among them, who we'll be talking with in a moment, there have been some philanthropies that have started to embrace this topic and think about the ways that it should integrate into their strategies, but by and large, most institutions have maybe approached it with a bit more curiosity, certainly, but trepidation, uncertain about how AI should fit into their operations and certainly into their actual strategies to drive change on the topics that they care about most. And we think it's so critical that institutions see this as a tool, just another tool in their tool belt to advance their work on housing, on climate, on health. And so one of the ways that we're trying to help the sector as a whole make some progress is to really build a community of practice among other funders. And we did that, one of the ways we did that was to bring about 100 institutions together last fall for a 2-day workshop and really sit in community and get hands-on. We reviewed draft proposals. We had technologists come in and talk about the sequencing that's involved in a technology development process. And we walked away with, I think, a core set of kind of hallmarks of a strong technology proposal. When a grant seeker is coming to a funder and saying, this is what I want to do with AI, what should they be saying? How should they be demonstrating what they plan to do? And I wanted to share 3 of those with you today. The first is one you may have heard before, but it bears repeating incredibly often. Clearly define the problem. Too often, unfortunately, we see, and I think partly this is due to the incredible potential of these tools, there's so much excitement about what they can do. And so we start from a place of, I know I can work this, I'd love to work this new technology into my work somewhere. We'll figure it out when we get there. That is not sort of the most strategically sound way to take this work forward, right? We don't want, let's bring a chatbot in to take our food pantry example, for example. A chatbot in to help our customers find out when food may be available. Not particularly clear, not particularly actionable, but instead, we've noticed that we have two kind of categories of clients. Some that are chronically in need of food support, and some that may be coming to us for a one-time sort of bridge in a moment of crisis. We think we have some data that might signal which of our clients are in those groups, and if we could predict where they would fall earlier, we would be able to serve them much better. That's an AI problem, and that's a really, really exciting opportunity to go further. Second is to understand the strengths and limitations of your data. At PGMF, we actually run a workshop called Data Readiness. It's a really, really important part of the process. I'm sure this group, everyone in this room knows that almost regardless of the AI use case or tool, it's only going to be as good as the data on which it's trained or on the data on which it's querying. Understanding the data that you have, if it's in two places, are those two places going to be able to talk to each other, those two data sets? Do you own all the data that you have? Have the people who perhaps supplied the data given their consent to use it in the way that you're imagining using it with this AI tool? It's not that you should have answers to all these questions at the outset, but that there should be a demonstration of some of the thinking behind it and how you may adjust your approach depending on the answers as you move forward. And last, it's really critical to try to, your very, very best to know what skills you need and when you'll need them. As I mentioned a moment ago, the technology development process kind of unfurls in a way that is perhaps different from most other project rollouts or program rollouts in the nonprofit context. It's going to be a bit modular. It has distinct phases: user research, design, prototyping. All of these involve feedback that may lead to pivots or, changes in plans. It's helpful to be able to articulate contingencies, think about what kind of expertise you might need at these various points, how that might affect your timing, your budget, and being able to articulate, again, not present a crystal ball that you know where it's headed, but instead that you know that there may be multiple pathways ahead of you and how you'll plan to react. I want to end on a note. I think it's a really important note to share in conversations like this, which is it's not going to be the case that every nonprofit institution or civil society institution should become a builder or user of AI. Many of you will. Many of you may find those really, really well-defined problems that speak to you and that align really well with a tool that's in your tool belt. I think what we believe very strongly and why we think conversations like this are so important is that it's only when this community, both funders and the folks in this room, and our friends at large technology companies that bring us together in this way and that are the drivers of so much important innovation in this space, create conversation that builds bridges between communities' lived experience and the potential of these technologies, that folks who want to participate have access to participate and the tools at their disposal to do so. That's the only way we're going to get to that future I sort of described at the beginning of my remarks. One where communities' lived experience really start to shape the tools that are shaping their lives, where there is in some sense almost a public option for the AI that we are using in our work. We like to think of that future, we like to call that future a human-centered AI future. It's what we aspire to be building day in and day out at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. It's an honor to be building that alongside many of you. And we're excited to continue to do so. Thank you so much.
Michele, thank you so much, and Nick, thank you so much for those remarks, and we'll turn it over to you in a moment. But first, I was wondering if you could just kick off by telling us a little bit about the Omidyar Network.
Well, first off, this is such a great room, and it is such an honor and privilege to be here. I want to thank my friends at Microsoft and Naria, my dear friend Nick, to just have the idea to get amazing people together in one room. There is a power in convening and sharing information. And I think many of us coming out of COVID, we forgot the power of being in a room together. And so I just want to thank you for your leadership here. The Omidyar Network, we are a philanthropic venture. So what is that? So we believe in supporting and funding the culture of tech. What tech should look like, who should be a part of it, what are the creative narratives around it. The business of tech, so the companies, the startup founders, the ideas, the investors who are helping to fund this movement. And finally, the governance of tech. We work with our friends at the McGovern Foundation, working with multinationals like the UN and others, thinking about what is the worldwide governance of this amazing technology, and how are we making sure that that is a multi-stakeholder process that everyone has an opportunity to engage. But I want to start with one other thing. Oftentimes you'll see in your laptop, on someone's laptop, that there are stickers, right? Have you all seen stickers on someone's laptop? Sometimes it's a quirky thing, or you may have, on my laptop, I have a Care Bear because I have tons of children. But I also have a sticker on the back of my laptop that says, "You belong here." And I want to lead with that, because oftentimes when we have conversations about technology or who's funding or who's leading, we often hear it that it's something that's happening to us as opposed to something that we are a part of. And at our core, Omidyar Network is really focused on making sure we all feel that we are the protagonists in our digital future.
That's really wonderful. We belong here. That's so great. You know, you mentioned this a little bit, that it's not just about funding one nonprofit, but it's that creating that whole ecosystem. And kind of with that vantage point, I'm just curious about what trends that you're seeing so far regarding AI funding.
So many things. I also will have to have a fangirl moment. Who is the wonderful woman that I met from Joyce Meyer's Industries? Are you in the room? Okay, so I wanted to start with saying that there are rock stars in the room. In this room, nonprofits from all over, in your communities, you are pillars. You are the people who are leading and changing our lives on a day-to-day basis. I am a former nonprofit employee, an NGO, before law school and a little bit after law school when I was super broke. And I am so thankful for the leadership of nonprofit executives and talented folks who make a commitment to engaging in this work. And I think one of the things that we see is a trend is that some people are saying, okay, well, I now need to build my own AI tools. Stop, time out, you don't have to do that. We want some people to feel like you are the builder of this technology. But we also want some of the rock stars that are in the room to influence the people who are building these AI tools. And when we all see our strength and our value and what we're able to bring to this conversation, that agency I referred to earlier, that's something that we as funders and those who believe in this partnership as a real partnership want to see. One of the organizations that both the McGovern Foundation and Omidyar Network fund is something called the Responsible Youth Technology Fund, where we work with youth-led or intergenerationally led organizations who are thinking about, what does responsible technology mean to me? And so one of our groups in that cohort is called the Cyber Collective. And they work on cybersecurity, data privacy, and understanding technology for Gen Z. So they have the Riz. Do you guys know what the Riz is? Okay, no, I didn't know what the Riz is. Nobody in this room has Riz, but they do, okay? And what they do is they take these applications around cyber that many of us often think about, but they put it in terms and accessible information for the young people. And that's really one of the trends that we hope to see. Not a one-size-fits-all approach, but really who you are, your community, the needs that you have, are really developing ideas and applications to support your work.
That's great. And are there any trends too at all that you're like really, that giving the inside information and scoop to this room.
Yeah, well, I definitely see collaboration with multiple partners. I think your research, your ideas, the work that you're doing in communities, we're seeing groups of nonprofits or groups of organizations think about, hey, I'm really good at policy analysis. I might be really good, or I have a huge list of people who might be interested in a particular topic, and coming together to develop applications or to give insight to other builders is something that we see and we want to continue to see.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that the kids would say you have Riz.
Oh, I'm trying. My 14-year-old would disagree, but that's okay.
I hear you. So Nick, back over to you. And again, it was a great presentation. And I wrote this down, communities lived experience. And you really talked about that of like, how can, nonprofits bring that perspective? Because I know that often when nonprofits are trying to defend their projects or ask for funding, it's all about data and in this like specific way. And it's very hard to like quantify AI right now and be like, okay, it's hitting this metric and this target, or is it? Is there any advice you'd have about how to kind of show the value to funders?
It's a great question. I want to say that one of the things that we think is really important as part of the answer to your question is actually, and it's something we address directly in the work that we've been doing, the community building with other philanthropies, is actually saying quite directly, this is going to require you to rethink how you think about impact measurement on a couple of levels, right? One is there's a time horizon for this work to develop, for a tool to first be built and then deployed in the context in which it's intended to be deployed, and for the impact of the tool to be felt in its programmatic context, whether it's the, measuring the efficiencies in the food pantry sort of food distribution example I came to a couple of times, right? You're not going to see that in 6 months. You may not see it in 12 months, and you may not see it until 24. And so I think there needs to be a belief and an understanding of how does the tool enable a different set of behaviors that lead to a different set of outcomes. We believe that we see that sort of logic chain that connects the tool to the outcomes. We're going to trust that it's going to get there, and we're going to broaden our appetite for risk a little bit to give it a shot. I understand that what I'm saying is essentially like it's the funders that need to sort of take that on, and I want to kind of own that and say that's something that we certainly have seen more and more institutions start to become open to. What I would share back then with those that are then seeking the funding is I understand that you're often constrained and boxed in by what the funder has asked you to tell them or provide, or the context in which they've asked you to write an application. But the more you can sort of, I think it does come back to that problem definition piece that I already spoke about, right? Like, if you take the example I gave of this grouping of, two different types of clients, and like, if you can quantify how not knowing the answer to that question really makes it harder for you to deliver the tidier outcomes that the funder usually asks you for, I think the more compelling your case is, that you can deliver the value that they have been asking you for, perhaps for years, and the X number of people served or cost or whatever it may be. And I think it's just being able to make that, articulate the connection, right? That's really, really critical.
Yeah, and Michele, I don't know if you want to add from your perspective with the Omidyar Network and kind of the funding that you do of how are you approaching that kind of question of the impact and measuring the impact of the investments that you're making?
So I often say data is really at the core, it's about a story that we're telling about the people and the communities that we're working with. And so I often ask our grantees and our partners, or even some of our companies that we invest in, to like step back and think about what is the story that you want to communicate about this moment or this block of time. And what I often feel like sometimes with our partners who are on a shoestring budget, that they feel like they have to answer every question and that they have to use this technology to solve all of our challenges. And I really want to disabuse anyone in this room of thinking that this technology alone is going to solve all of our challenges. I don't think it can, but what it can do is it can add some equal access to this fountain of information that is out there. It can take away one of the 12 hats that you wear every day in your roles, and it can think about, if I can do better analysis, or if I can take off one of my Superman or Superwoman capes and have a helper think through this issue with me. And so the best examples that I see are really when people think about data or AI tools and applications to augment the work that they're already doing. Not to replace, but to really augment that and to help bring greater clarification for the story that you want to communicate to funders. And I think when we kind of step back and we recognize we do have something to say here, and this is going to help me solve that particular problem, or it's going to step in and help take off one of my many roles and responsibilities. And that then enabled me to move to a deeper level of critical thinking or insight or creativity. Because what I think AI is also going to do is give us the opportunity to get to higher order level thinking and creation. And at the end of the day, I think all of us have ideas that we want to action, and we never have enough time. So let's think about what AI can do to take away some of those day-to-day pressures so that you can really experiment with some of the great work that you're doing.
That's really wonderful. Well, Nick, I'm going to put you on the spot and just because we have a really cool session tomorrow. It's going to be in the Regency Ballroom in the afternoon time block. But could you share a little bit about what you're going to do in that session? Because it's super hands-on and I think very actionable.
Of course. I'm happy to take the opportunity for commercial anytime. I have a handful of colleagues with me here in the audience, and the four of us will be facilitating a workshop that I believe we've called Smart Tech Sound Proposals.
I was like, smart tech, strong
proposals. Thank you. And what we're going to be doing is taking, so I'm going to give you three of the hallmarks of a strong proposal in my remarks a moment ago. We're going to kind of go through the whole list. We're going to talk through what it looks like to put together a proposal that represents a really, really strategic approach to technology development. Then we're going to get hands-on. We're going to review an example proposal in groups. We're going to have discussion. We're going to share sort of a revised proposal that we think demonstrates sort of a more robust approach that kind of we think is sort of an exemplar of how you want to put your best foot forward when describing plans to incorporate AI into your work. We'll have a good group of folks that are, do this every day in their work to give you advice and feedback. I'm really excited. We'd love to see as many people who can join us there.
Yeah, so bring your ideas and they can help you workshop to actually think about how to bring those to life.
And I may throw out one more plug only because we have the time. For those that can't join us, a lot of what we'll talk about is actually available at PGMF's Learning Hub, which is a place that we have put up a number of resources to help organizations along their AI journey. It's at learn.mcgovern.org. It's very easy to remember, learn.mcgovern.org. And so if you miss us tomorrow, you'll be able to find all those materials there as well.
That's awesome. And Michele, last question to you, because Omidyar is all about collaboration and partnership, and we have lots of different, folks from all types of sectors, and you anchored really on like those partnership proposals as well. Just curious about like what are some like one or two hot takes on partnership and collaboration best practices during this time?
I'm going to give you three quick things. One, you are the person best positioned to tell your story. So think about what is the unique value add of your work in the community to our friends who are watching around the world. What is your unique story that you want to tell about the work that you're doing? And then two, are there partners who can step in on pieces where you're not as strong? And if you can think about your partnership as a collection, I love to cook, as a stew that you're putting together. Someone's really good at data analysis. Someone's really good at organizing. Someone's really good at telling the story. Bringing all of those pieces together in collaboration and partnership, you're able to build a cohort, and then you can come as a collective to donors and say, look at this well-reasoned, designed group of nonprofit leaders who are ready to move to the next stage. How can you help support all of the work that we're doing? We love to see that creativity and that innovation. And again, you are the best people to tell your own story.
I love that. I want that stew.
Yes.
Okay, I want to say a huge thank you to Nick and to Michele for an amazing panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. It is fabulous to be here, and I'm super excited to share a little bit about the science of happiness. As promised, you're gonna get a whole Ivy League class, and it's gonna be squished down to just a half hour, which is great, because the half-hour version, we don't make you take the SAT, or we don't make you pay for the Yale tuition or anything like that. You just get it really cheaply. But what I was gonna start with was first how I got interested in this idea of how we can build resilience and how we can use scientific tools to figure out how we can do that. But then I'm gonna spend most of my time giving you, again, this very short version of the class. And since it's later in the afternoon, especially for some of you who might have flown here from the East Coast, we're gonna do it in a little bit of a listicle version. You're gonna get the top 7 tips that the science shares about how you can build resilience as a nonprofit leader. But first off, how did I get interested in this stuff? As mentioned, I'm a faculty member over at Yale University. I've been teaching there for over 2 decades. But in the last couple years, I took on a new role on campus. I became what's called the head of college. That meant that I lived on campus with students. I got really kind of close and personal to students, saw them in the dining hall, saw them in the coffee shops. And I honestly didn't like what I was seeing, but as I was seeing the college student mental health crisis up close and personal, where right now nationally among college students, more than 40% of college students report being too depressed to function most days. Right now nationally, more than 60% of college students say they're overwhelmingly anxious to the point that they can't do their work. Right? This was a real crisis I was seeing. And so I wanted to do something about it. I was there in this community kind of wanting to help. And my field of psychology actually has lots of strategies we can use to decrease stress, to promote resilience, to fight burnout, and so on. And so I said, well, why don't I put a whole new class together? I'll just like stick everything that my field has to say into a whole new class for Yale students. I called it something cool, so it'd sort of pop out of the course catalog. I called it Psychology and the Good Life, which hopefully sounded fun, had the Riz, as I just learned, from the last session, right? But I really wanted students to notice it, right? But I thought it was a new class on campus. I figured, 20 or 30 students would take it. You sort of heard the epilogue to the story already. It was a little bit more than 20 or 30 students. A quarter of the entire student body showed up, which I actually think bracketed is very humbling and cool. It means our young people don't like this crisis of feeling so burnt out and stressed out, and I think they really wanted an evidence-based approach to kind of fixing it. But if you were kind of nerdily paying attention to that syllabus that I flashed up so quickly, you might have noticed that this story started all the way back in 2018, where I think, frankly, it was sort of prescient to be talking about mental health and burnout and all these things, right? Fast forward to 2025, and I think especially in a room with a bunch of nonprofit leaders, I can say, it's been rough. Like, it's been a bit of a dumpster fire when it comes to our collective mental health, right? We can pick our reason, right? It's worth remembering that we just came out of an unprecedented global pandemic that probably affected a lot of your funding, a lot of your industries, a lot of the causes that you pay attention to. We're in a changing economic climate. We're in a changing, physical climate. There's a lot of stuff going on. And it's worth noting that it's normative in the mess that this is to feel burned out. It's normative to feel stressed. It's normative to be experiencing frustration and a whole host of other negative emotions. That's what you're supposed to feel when the world is on fire. But that's not a good thing to feel if you want to be making progress in all the important work that you're doing. And so what I want to talk about today is, given the realities that we're really facing in 2025, how can we become a little bit happier? How can we feel less burned out? How can we feel less stressed? How can we be resilient leaders in the face of the troubling reality that we all face? That's my task in the next half hour, big thing that we've been asked to do. But we're gonna get through it, and we're gonna get through it in the easy listicle version. As I mentioned, I'm gonna go through the top 7 insights that I think we get from the science of happiness. Starting with the most important one. This is the one you have to kind of buy into if you really wanna become a resilient leader. And it is the insight that if you want to perform well, if you want to solve the important problems that so many of your organizations are taking on, you actually have to focus on happiness first. And this is something I think that we get very wrong when we think about our work. Many of you are taking on incredibly difficult, tough, thorny problems, important problems, and you think, well, if I could just make some headway into succeeding at those things, if my organization could succeed, if I could perform well, we'll do good work, and then I can rest and be happy, right? You don't think of the opposite causal arrow. What if I focused on my self-care? What if I took care of myself? What if I invested in positive emotions? That would get me to perform better and then solve all the problems that I want to solve. We don't think the causal arrow goes that way, but if you look at what the research shows, there's lots of reason to suspect that that's the way it works, that focusing on your self-care and your positive emotion first will actually make you perform better. How do we know this? Well, we know this from lots of studies that have looked at the kinds of things that predict the bottom line. Later on here, I'm going to be talking up here with Meg from LinkedIn. We think a lot about what are the kinds of things we need to get a good job, right? We want all those LinkedIn skills on our resume. We don't think that one of the things we should pay attention to get a job is our positive emotion. But that's what researchers like Ed Diener and his colleagues were interested in. He asked, does having positive emotion at time 1 predict you getting job obtainment, getting a good job you like, and getting a higher salary later on? So he measured students' cheerfulness at age 18, standard survey that we use to measure cheerfulness. And he used that to predict not whether or not those 18-year-olds got a job that they wanted, but whether those 18-year-olds got a job at age 27, and then later at age 35. And what he finds is the most cheerful 18-year-olds were the ones who had the best job obtainment. They were also the ones who were making the most money. This is another spot where we get happiness wrong. We think, if I get lots of money, then I'll feel happier. We don't often think, if I could boost my mood and feel happier, that would lead to lots of money. But in fact, study after study shows that that seems to be the case. Happier at time 1 leads to more money at time 2. Now you could ask, why is that? Like, are our HR organizations paying the happy people more? Like, we should get on, that seems wrong, like we should fix that. No, the reason is one that makes sense, which is that if you are happier, if you experience more cheerfulness, if you experience a positive mood, you actually just think more innovatively. One of my favorite studies that tested this came from the medical domain. Researchers bring doctors into the lab, medical doctors, and give them a kind of tough medical diagnosis problem. Some of you are my age, so you might remember that TV show like House MD, where you had those like weird diagnoses. Or some of you are older than me, so you might remember Quincy MD. I'm not gonna call you out, but these there's like weird doctor problems, right? That's what these MDs were given. But half of the doctors, before they got the problem, were put in a good mood first. They just watched some silly cat videos online, so they're kind of laughing and in a good mood. Then they get the problem. What do the researchers find? The doctors who were put in the good mood first were the ones who came up with the correct, often very innovative solution. And in some ways, you didn't need me to tell you this finding, right? Think of the last time you were in the opposite of a good mood, when you were just overwhelmed, when everything just felt like too much. Were you thinking creatively and coming up with your next big new idea? No, you were triaging. You were just getting stuff off your plate. You were narrowed in. When we are in a positive mood, we can think a little bit more expansively. And that's the kind of thing we need for resilient leadership, right? And so study after study shows that we get this causal arrow wrong. It's not the case, even though we kind of think it is, that if you just grind and kill yourself to fight these problems, that's the best way to perform. No, what the data shows is you might be leaving good performance on the table by not taking care of yourself. To take care of yourself first, promote positive emotions, focus on your happiness, do that first, you'll be coming up with the innovations and all the kind of great strategies that you need to do your work. And so that's one of the reasons I often start lots of my talks like this. I think we need to put our own self-care, our own happiness, our own positive emotions front and center. But then that raises a question, which is like, how do we do that? How do we do that in the real world that we're facing, where it's normative to be upset about some of the stuff that's happening out there? That's what the rest of the 7 tips are about. Starting with top insight number 2, if you really want to put your happiness first, you need to focus on becoming a little bit more social. Pretty much every study in the field of positive psychology, this field that I work in, shows that social people are more happy. If you do kind of time budget studies, you find that people who hang out with other humans more often are happier. If you spend more time with your friends and family member, you're happier. And even if you do experiments where you force people who don't feel like being social to be a little bit more social, they wind up experiencing more positive emotion, even introverts, right? Just being social seems to matter for our happiness. And that can be tough when we're feeling overwhelmed to put more of that social connection in, but that's when it's needed the most. But it's not just the act of hanging out with other people that seems to matter. It also is doing good for other people that matters. And this is where I feel like I'm really preaching to the choir. So many of your organizations are out there doing mission-driven work, but in the mix of things, you can kind of forget that, right? But the research shows that the act of doing nice things for others winds up making us feel happier. Controlled for income people who donate more money to charities wind up being happier than those that don't, right? This is not something that's kind of part of the public consciousness. I think we know it's good to do nice things for other people, but when we think of the kinds of things that make us happy, we often focus on self-care, treat yourself, self. My students get like little pillows in their college dorm room that say stuff like this, and I find this really frustrating because the research really shows it's just the opposite. If we want to be happier, we should focus on other people, not ourselves. How do we know this? Again, from studies that force people who might not even be thinking about doing something nice for somebody else to do something nice for somebody else, and they wind up happier. One of my favorite studies on this comes from just up the road at the University of British Columbia. Researchers Elizabeth Dunn and her colleagues did this study where they walk up to college students on the street, hand them some money. This is a very fun study for college students to be in, by the way. It's like, oh my gosh, get some money. They say, hey, here's 20 bucks, but here's how to spend it. You either have to spend it to do something to treat yourself, do something nice for yourself, or you have to spend it to help someone else. Help a friend, donate it to a charity, a cause you care about, has to go to somebody else. She calls these students later in the day. What does she find? The ones that spent the money on other people are happier at the end of the day and even at the end of the week. And so that's top insight number one. If we want to be happier, we got to get out of our heads that it's just about us. We need to remember that it's about other people, connecting with other people, and doing good for other people too. And I think for so many of you in this room, that involves just reminding yourself and reframing the work that you're doing as being this insight right here. Top insight number two. Top insight number three is another way we can change our behaviors to feel happier. It's that we gotta focus on healthy habits. We gotta remember that our minds, our mental health is connected to our bodies and our physical health. We need to do the stuff that's good for our bodies. What do I mean? Simple things like exercising and moving your body, right? Studies, meta-analytic studies, which are studies of studies, show that a half hour of cardio every day can be as effective at reducing symptoms of depression as taking an antidepressant medication. There's similar results for anxiety. Your psychiatrist should be prescribing, hey, get to the gym and hop on the treadmill for a half hour, because sometimes it's more effective. We forget that, but it is. But for the folks in this room, you all look pretty fit that I can see, so maybe you all are doing this. Different healthy habit that I think my experience with nonprofit leaders suggests that they need a little bit more of is this. This, everyone, is sleep. That is what it looks like. It doesn't look like this, where you go into office and you're kind of falling asleep. Sleep matters so much for our mental health, so much that I'm gonna nerd out and just show you one graph so you can see how powerful this is. This is a study by Dinges and colleagues that looked at the importance of getting robust sleep in college students. So they bring college students into the lab and test their mood after 3 different sleep conditions. First, the nice sleep condition. You get to sleep a normal amount. Normal, what we're supposed to be getting, by the way, is 7 to 8 hours a night. You get that for 2 days. The not so nice thing is that the days after that, you get deprived sleep. You only get to sleep about 5 hours a night. This is where my poor college students are much less polite than you. They start laughing because they think 5 hours a night is a good amount of sleep. I actually think we could solve all those bad mental health statistics in our young people that I talked about earlier just by getting them to sleep, but you'll see why in this study. But these aren't evil researchers. They end the experiment kind of bringing the subjects back up to normal sleep. What happens? Well, here's my nerdy graph. I'm plotting what's called a profile of mood score. Basically, bigger numbers are higher mood. And we get down to the bottom of the graph, it kind of looks like you might need that antidepressant medication and so on. And this is what happens after a single week of deprived sleep. Again, not all-nighters, just like 5 hours or so a night, right? So we need to prioritize our sleep, and that means we need to prioritize our sleep hygiene. I don't want to call anyone out in the room, but how many of you in the middle of the night, if I asked you why aren't you sleeping or what happens when you wake up in the middle of the night, it's because you do this, right? The blue light, the anxiety-provoking information, all your emails, it's not good to look at in the middle of the night. And one of my favorite recommendations, the best happiness-inducing material possession you can give someone is an old-school alarm clock. You know, the old ones that don't talk to the internet, that don't show you what was in the news yesterday. Get one of those for yourself and put your phone very far away so you're not tempted to do this. But all of this is about, top insight number 3, you gotta focus on those healthy habits. And you gotta focus on those healthy habits, especially when things are stressful. I meet a lot of folks in the nonprofit sector who say things like, oh yeah, I exercise and I sleep well until the quarterly report is due, or until that grant deadline's coming up, then I don't sleep at all. And I'm like, no, that's exactly the time that you need all those things even more so you can feel better and perform better. So those are ways we should change our behaviors to feel better. Top insight number 4 is a way that we can change our mindsets to feel better, our thought patterns. And it is that if we want to be happier, we need to find ways to be in the present moment so we can notice all the good stuff. This is something that is kind of in our cultural parlance. We talk a lot about kind of mindfulness and things, but I think it's not cultural practice. We spend a lot of our time not in the present moment, more doing this. Is my favorite physical representation of mind wandering, where you're thinking about that conversation you had with your spouse, or that due date that you have coming up, or your flight. You're anywhere but here. Researchers at Harvard estimate just how much time we spend mind wandering. They do this funny study where they ping people and ask, Hey, what are you doing right now? Are you paying attention to what you're doing right now? And how are you feeling? And when researchers do that, they find that people self-report mind wandering, not paying attention to what's going on, just under 50% of the time. It's like 49.8% of the time, which is bad. We're missing half our life. Think about the performance consequences of everybody in your organization not paying attention 49% of the time. Not good. But it also has a happiness cost. The researchers also find that when people self-report mind wandering, even if it's to good stuff, I'm going to this really cool offsite that I'm excited about, I'm like thinking about that, people self-report not being as happy as if they're focused on what they're doing. Even if what you're doing is boring, some boring spreadsheet kind of thing, it's just better to be on task than not. So how do we get back more on task? Well, research gives us a couple ways. One is through the simple act of what scientists, and I guess lay people too, call savoring. Next time you're eating something delicious, listening to a nice piece of music, out in a beautiful scene, pay attention. How would I describe this? In the case of eating something delicious, what does this taste like? What does this feel like? Just turn on your noticing muscles and pay a little bit of attention. It's a practice that's just available to any of you at any point. But there's also a thing we can do to build up our mindfulness muscles over time, and that is the practice of meditation. Some of you in the room might meditate or have heard of others that do. There's lots of different meditation practices, but basically what they all have in common is you commit to focusing on something intentionally, maybe your breath. So you're like, I'm gonna focus on my breath. And if you've ever meditated, you know what happens. Your mind does that thing where it's like, whoop, and it goes, and you try to yank it back on task and it wanders away and you yank it back. Those yank backs are like bicep curls for your focus. And in fact, there's evidence from folks like Hedy Kober at Yale showing that those little bicep curls actually can increase gray matter in regions of your brain that are useful for attention and focus. So you're literally changing your brain, even in cases of like novice meditators meditating for like 5-10 minutes at a time. A powerful practice, not just to focus during meditation, but to focus all during the times that you need to focus. And so those are ways that we can become in the present moment, savor all the good things. But top insight number 4 has this corollary that I think for this crowd might be even more important. Because the research shows that we don't just need to be in the present moment when the present moment's feeling, unicorns and rainbows and great. We also need to be in the present moment when the present moment is feeling kind of yucky. And I don't know about your present moments lately, but some of mine ain't been feeling so good, right? Some of mine have been filled with normative frustration, normative sadness, normative anxiety, right? These are emotions that are good for us. They're good because they're kind of like the alert signal on our car. They tell us what's going on. If we ignore it too much, that's bad. But they don't feel good. And they often kind of can interfere with our performance if we're not careful. And so what do kind of high-achieving type A folks like the folks in this room do? You say, nope, don't have time for that emotion, don't have time to feel frustration, definitely don't have time to feel overwhelm or burnout, I'm just gonna squish that down, right? And we think that works. But does it? Well, researchers have looked at this. Folks like James Gross and his colleagues at Stanford have studied this. And he finds it doesn't really work in the way we think. And it has some bad consequences. One of his studies brings students into the lab and has them do kind of the opposite of that doctor study where they get to watch happy videos, they get to watch really sad videos, things that would make you upset. But James Gross says, whatever you do, pretend that you're not feeling sad. Try to suppress that emotion as much as possible. Subjects can try to do that. Turns out there are consequences. One consequence is that subjects do worse on a memory test. They do worse on a risky decision-making task. Their thinking apparatus isn't working as well because part of their brain is holding down that negative emotion, trying to pretend it's not there. And that has a cost to your innovative thinking. Not great. Also not great for us physically. Even in this short laboratory task, James Gross finds evidence that these subjects show signs of cardiac stress. They're stressing out their cardiac system after just suppressing this like 5-minute sad video. Imagine where we're all gonna be at the end of the year. Like imagine what we have taken on in the last couple of years, right? Not good, right? So we shouldn't suppress our emotions, but that raises the question, how do we get through them? And science has a really great hack. If you take nothing else away from a talk, as folks in this industry, I think this is the best one. It's a meditation practice you can do to sit with and allow your emotions to just be there. And it goes by a handy acronym of RAIN. It's a practice that's been popularized by the meditation teacher Tara Brach, and the acronym stands for Recognize, Allow, Investigate, and Nurture. We'll kind of go through how this works. So let's say you experience a negative emotion. You read something in the news that really frustrates you. You get an email that makes you feel really scared. You notice, something yucky's happened, negative emotion. And you say, that random Yale lady from the Microsoft conference, she said I could do this rain practice, and you've already achieved the first step, recognize. I'm going through a yucky emotion right now. This doesn't feel good, right? Then you do the hardest step, which is A, allow. You say, all right, I'm gonna sit here with this anxiety, feeling a little frustrated. I'm just gonna allow that feeling to be there just as it is. But you give your brain something to do while you're just sitting with that feeling. And that's the next step, I. You say, okay, what does this feeling feel like in my body? Maybe my chest is getting tight. Maybe my brow is furrowing. Maybe I have a strong craving to eat something, check my email, be anywhere. But this, don't act on this, just notice. That is where my brain and my body goes when I'm feeling pissed off with a side of overwhelmed or sad with a little bit of anxiety, right? The beauty of this investigate step is clinical psychologists will tell us that emotions are like a wave. We'll feel it for a little bit, but if you just sit with your emotion, it'll actually subside and go down. But you don't end there. You end on this last step, N, which is to nurture. You ask, how can I treat myself with self-compassion? What can I take off my plate? What do I need right now? Powerful strategy for those in this room because research suggests that acceptance practices like RAIN can reduce burnout in even the most awful occupations. So it can reduce burnout, for example, in first responders, right, who are dealing, or in palliative care workers, people who are dealing with death on the line. I think this is a strategy that should be your go-to to not just kind of suppress those negative emotions, which doesn't work, but to sit with them, allow them, and use them the way they're supposed to be used. So that is top insight number 4. We ought to be in the present moment, even when the present moment is yucky. And I think as you think about what tools you need to be resilient leaders in the face of the actual world we find ourselves in now, with the actual problems we're facing, this one is gonna be key. Because ultimately, resilience isn't about ignoring your negative emotions. It's not about kind of like pretending everything's fine when it's not fine. It's about saying, hey, this feels yucky. I don't like this, but I can tolerate it. I can learn from it, right? I can see my emotions and figure it out. So really good top insight. Be in the present moment, not just when everything's ice cream cones, but also when it's feeling kind of yucky. Now we get to top insight number 5, which I think is really one that follows up on that last practice, that nurture practice of RAIN. Another thought pattern shift that I think we need to engage in to feel better, we need to give ourselves a gift of what you might call self-compassion. Let's talk about the opposite of self-compassion first, probably something that's very familiar to you. Something comes up, you're under deadline, there's a lot to do, something goes wrong. What do you say to yourself in your head? If you're like many people, you might say kind of some nasty things to yourself in your head. You might be very self-critical. And I often joke that if HR could hear the things we say to ourselves in our head, we would all be fired, because we would hopefully never talk to a coworker the way we talk to ourselves in our heads, right? We can ask, why do we do this? And I think it's not because we're masochists or we hate ourselves. I think we genuinely think that being that self-critical, being that hard on ourselves, being that push is good for our performance, right? It gets us through the tough times. It helps us not make mistakes. It helps us not procrastinate, right? This is our assumption. But one of the things we know in psychology is that a lot of our assumptions are wrong, and here's a case where our assumptions are very wrong. If you do studies of people's self-critical self-talk, you find it makes them perform less well, makes them connect less well to teammates, it increases inflammation. It's just like bad all around. But you might ask, what's the alternative? How do you talk to yourself if you want to be kind to yourself? And that is where we get to strategies of self-compassion. A lot of the great work on self-compassion was done by this researcher, Cris Concepcion. She's a professor at UT Austin. If you have trouble with self-compassion, this is a great book to dig into. But she also breaks self-compassion down into 3 very convenient steps, these here: mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness. So let's go through these. Starting with mindfulness. You start by noticing there's a problem. You're not feeling so hot right now. I'm feeling like I screwed something up. I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I am at my wit's end. I don't feel good right now. You mindfully notice, recognize what you're actually going through. But then you go to that next step, common humanity. This is the important one. You say, and that's normal. It is normal in my industry to feel overwhelmed given what is on my plate. It is normal in 2025 to feel frustrated or scared or anxious. It's normal in the line of work I do to occasionally need rest, right? You just say this is a common human experience and you normalize it. But then again, just like with the RAIN practice, you don't end there. There's a final step of self-kindness. You say, what can I do to treat myself like a friend? What can I take off my plate? How can I be kind to myself? And this question of how can you treat yourself like a friend, I think is an important one, because sometimes we confuse self-compassion with self-indulgence. We think if we're nice to ourselves, we're just gonna like let ourselves off the hook for whatever. We could be just totally messing up or totally like not taking care of ourselves. But if you think of how you would talk to a good friend who is actually messing up, you wouldn't scream at them like a drill sergeant, like you scream at yourself in your head, but you also wouldn't let them off the hook. You would get curious. You would go into problem-solving mode. You would say, what is going on? What has happened? How can I fix this? What do you need, right? That's what you say to yourself. So you go from like critical drill sergeant mode into like good coach who's problem-solving and try to fix stuff mode. That's self-compassion. And it turns out it has a whole host of benefits that we wouldn't have known until Kristin Neff's lovely research. One of the things is that self-compassion practices are one of the best tools we have in psychology to reduce the negative effects of terrible experiences, the negative effects of trauma. Kristin Neff has actually studied this in the military. She works with Afghan and Iraqi vets who she independently measures their levels of self-compassion. And she finds that equating for combat experience and equating for the terrible stuff that happens, those vets who actually experience the most self-compassion are kind of nicest to themselves. They end up kind of not getting PTSD, this sort of post-traumatic stress disorder, even though they have the same terrible experiences, that they're not screaming at themselves and thinking that they've done something wrong because they're getting it. That actually reduces the negative effects of trauma. And so I think for a lot of the work that some of you are doing in the room, really great for maybe the folks that you're working with, but also maybe really great for yourself facing such difficult times. Those are the kind of extreme cases of trauma, but self-compassion also works for the little things. It allows you to kind of achieve the goals that you want to achieve. For example, eating a little bit more healthy. It's easier when you're self-compassionate to do stuff that kind of your future self wants you to do because you're not beating yourself up in the moment. Relevant to my students and relevant to all of you who have to write grant proposals and quarterly reports and so on, self-compassion actually reduces procrastination. Why? Again, you're not beating yourself up, so it becomes easier to do the hard things that you need to do. And self-compassion, it turns out, is a fantastic strategy to just build your compassion muscles more generally. So people who are more self-compassionate are more compassionate with the folks on their team, with their spouses, with their kids. If you can be nice to the person that it's hardest to be nice to, namely yourself, then you get really good at being nice to other folks. And so self-compassion, incredible, powerful strategy, but it's one that for, again, very high-achieving folks, very like push, push, push yourself folks, can be hard. And so I like when strategies have like a clear hack that you can use very practically, very fast. And Kristin Neff has a good one for self-compassion. She recommends before using that self-compassionate self-talk, you use self-compassionate touch. And so we're gonna practice. It's gonna look a little stupid, but we'll do it. Give yourself a little mini hug or a little stroke on the arm. How someone who really cares about you would touch you if you were in a bad situation. And here's a dumb but really beautiful feature of our brain. Our brains don't know who's touching us. They don't know it's you. They think it's a kind, this is true in other contexts too, I don't have to get into them, but they don't know it's you. And this means you feel the comfort of a good friend doing the same thing. It's also just a nice cue that you can talk to yourself kindly. So you can go through those 3 steps. Mindfulness, this sucks right now. This is really hard right now. I'm struggling, I messed up, right? Common humanity, but stress is just a part of life. I'm just human. Of course, it makes sense that everybody's going through this in this industry. I'm not alone. Finally, self-kindness. How can I be kind to myself? What do I need to take off my plate, et cetera, et cetera. Super powerful strategies for getting through the tough stuff, having the same bad experiences happen to you, but not having the negative psychological effects. That's self-compassion. Okay, so that's top insight number 5. Give yourself the gift of self-compassion. Now we're gonna switch gears a little bit to how you can be nice to yourself in your work and how you can sort of see your work, even when it's feeling a little overwhelming, as better for you. It is through the practice of finding a way to realign your work with what are called your strengths, right? Probably most of you got into the work that you do because you want it to be purposeful, you want it to be meaning-driven, but we can get lost about what are the parts of our work that does that for us. What kind of makes your job a calling? That's what lots of researchers focus on. And they do that by asking the question, well, when people self-report that their jobs are callings, that they really love their job, like what are they doing differently? And it turns out that one of the things they're doing differently is that they might be engaging in what are called your signature strengths during your job. What do I mean? Well, researchers have gone out and they've asked people, what are the values that you can bring to work? What are the different kinds of strengths you can bring to your work? And they've argued that that list of strengths isn't infinite. In fact, if you kind of code them, there tends to be about 24 different kinds of what they call character strengths. And I'll put out the big list here. There are things like engaging in bravery or creativity, humor on the job, loving learning, a sense of zest for life, right? You can kind of see these. And I invite you to kind of read through them, because it turns out that there are individual differences in which one of these resonate for you. They're all good. You know, you might be like, yeah, citizenship, integrity, that's great, but I'm really about perspective, or I'm really about love or spirituality, whatever it is. The one that resonates most with you is what researchers would call your signature strength. It's the one, the research shows, that if you engage with it at work, will actually make you feel like your job is a calling. Even when the bad stuff is happening, you'll still feel like you love your job. Now you might be like, that is great, but like, how do I bring, for example, if your appreciation of beauty or humor or modesty, whatever it is, how do I bring that into my work? How can I find ways to use more of my signature strengths in the actual work that your jobs involve? And this is here where I love the research of Amy Resninsky, a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. She studies a practice that she has christened job crafting. And what she means by this is taking whatever job you have and whatever your job description is, the things you have to do, and finding a way to infuse those strengths in as creatively as you can. And the reason I love Amy's work is that she doesn't work with folks in your industry who are doing, I imagine, lots of different creative, problem-solving things that have a lot of independence. She studies job crafting in hospital janitorial staff workers. These are the people who are cleaning the linen in hospital rooms, or when people get sick, they have to clean up vomit, right? This is not a job where you think you'd have a lot of flexibility to bring in things like a zest for life or spirituality or creativity. But she finds that a third of these hospital janitorial staff workers actually self-report that their job is a calling. Interestingly, it's that high, between a quarter and a third. And the ones that really love their job are the ones that job craft. She tells these really beautiful stories. There's one story she tells of a janitorial staff worker who worked in a chemotherapy ward. So if you've been unlucky enough to have to get chemotherapy yourself or know someone that did, you know people get really sick. And so a lot of this guy's job was actually mopping up vomit. That was his job description. But he said, no, that's not my job description. My strengths are humor and social intelligence. My job is to make that patient who's having a really terrible day laugh. And he had like a standard shtick that he did. He would come in and he would say, oh, you vomited, this is a big one, overtime for me, I'm gonna take it really slow. They would laugh just like you're laughing, and he was like, that's my job. She mentioned another staff worker who worked in a coma ward, so this person couldn't interact with patients because those patients were in a coma, but every day she took the art and the plants that were on the wall and moved them around. Her strength was creativity. And she kind of thought that that was helping the patients recover, not clear medically if that was true, but it gave her a sense of purpose at work that she loved, right? This is job crafting, and if hospital janitorial staff workers can bring those strengths into their work, for sure you can too, and for sure you can get the folks on your teams to do that too. One of the recommendations I often have for leaders is, do you know what the strengths of the folks in your organization are? You know what's on their profiles of their resumes they submitted, but can you dig deeper into what these strengths are? Find those out. Give them opportunities to express them. It might feel a little scary as a leader, but what the data show is you'll just get performance on the actual job description coming out better if people can express those and use them. So that's top insight number 6. You gotta find your strengths, figure out what they are, and figure out a way to put them into practice. Now we get to top insight number 7, the last one. You're almost done your whole Yale class. Deep breath. But this is the hardest one. It's that if we want to become happier, less burned out, we need to become wealthy, but not in money. That's good. You don't have to fundraise. It's not that. You need to become wealthy in time, which unfortunately is harder. This is a concept that lots of social scientists have been paying a lot of attention to, a concept they call time affluence, the subjective sense that you have some free time. It's the opposite sensation of what many of us experience, which is what researchers like Ashley Willens call time famine, where we're literally starving for time. And that word is apt because it turns out that the physiological profile of not having a lot of time looks a lot like famine. You develop things like inflammation, and you're triaging things and so on. And time famine is a huge hit on your well-being. In fact, one of Ashley's studies shows that if you self-report being very time famished, that's as bad a hit on your well-being as if you self-reported being unemployed. A lot of you, if you became unemployed suddenly tomorrow, would say that was a hit on your well-being. Just not having any time is that bad. And that's, a lot of you are making this expression, that's cool, I get it, I'm time famished too. Question is, what can we do about it? The cool thing about time affluence from a psychological perspective is that it's not the objective amount of free time you have, it's the subjective sense that you have some. And that means you can hack it in these interesting ways. You can, for example, buy yourself a little bit of time. Some of you who have some discretionary income have probably at some point gotten takeout, gone out for dinner. It's nice, but you probably didn't frame it as a savings in time. It was. If you went out and bought some pad thai, you know, last night before I flew out here, I came out and with my husband bought some pad thai. That was like noodles I didn't have to cook, I didn't have to clean, I didn't have to look up the recipe of how you make peanut sauce. Probably saved, what, hour and change, hour and 50 minutes? What did I do with that hour and 50 minutes? Did I put it back and invest in myself? You see that switch of kind of giving yourself some time? Powerful hack to spend your discretionary income on getting more time. But an even better one is to make good use of the free time we do have. Time surveys now show that we actually have more free time now than we did 15, 20 years ago, which is shocking to me, but I've seen the data, it's there. Problem is that the chunks of time we have are broken up in very stupid ways. 15, 20 years ago, we had whole 2-hour blocks. Now we got 15 minutes here, 10 minutes there when the Zoom meeting ends early. What the journalist Bridget Schultz has christened time confetti, little pieces of time that are floating around. We don't think they're that valuable, so we just blow them. You scroll through something terrible that's happened in the news. My vice is Reddit. I'll pull out Reddit and go through my Reddit thread. Not good, right? Not good because it doesn't necessarily make me happy, and I'm wasting that 5 minutes, 6 minutes here and there that could be put to good use. And so researchers like Ashley Willens recommend noticing your time confetti when you have these little moments and making what she calls a time confetti wish list. It's not like a to-do list. It's not work emails you have to answer in that time. It's how can you take care of yourself in those 5 minutes? Maybe that's when you text a friend. Maybe that's when you do a little rain meditation, take a deep breath, do the 7-minute New York Times workout, whatever it is. Use that time wisely, and it starts to add up. It also starts to make you feel a little less time famished. And so that's top insight number 7. We gotta find ways to become wealthy in time. I think that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about so many of these technological innovations, because they have the potential to help us here, and that winds up being really important. But look, congratulations, you made it through a whole Yale class. That was awesome, good job. If you're like, that was great, but I wanna go deeper without the SAT cost, I get it. We have the whole version of that class online on Coursera.org. If you just Google free Yale happiness class, you'll find it. Lots of folks have taken it, so share it with others. And we also have done a version for young people. So if you have a teenager in your life, free version up there that you could take with them too. And if you're like, I'm really time famished, I do not have time for a whole Yale class, thank you very much. You can listen to my podcast, much shorter, much easier. But I hope I've convinced you that the path to happiness is the path to becoming a more resilient leader and a better performing leader. Hope I've given you some tips to get you there. And thank you for having me. Now I will invite Meg back out so we can talk a little bit more.
Laurie, that was amazing. I do have a 16-year-old daughter, so I am going to center that course tonight. And in addition to feeling like we got a freebie for an extraordinary Yale course, I feel like I got 30 minutes of free therapy.
Good, yeah.
That was amazing.
I'll charge you all later. That was not.
It's true. I was self-hugging backstage and it was working. Did it work for you guys too? Okay. Well, thanks. We've got some time where I can ask Dr. Santos some questions, teasing out some of the themes that she was just speaking about, and also connecting some dots from what other speakers we heard today. But we're going to start with an easy one, a very LinkedIn-centric one, which is what we often do at LinkedIn, which is to tell me something that's not on your LinkedIn profile. And she has a great profile, by the way.
Oh, thank you. This is a little braggy, so I feel weird about it, but one time I won a pumpkin carving competition at the Austin Sculpture Garden, and I feel very proud of that. I'm really into Halloween, so that's not on my profile, but it so could be. I think.
What was the sculpture?
No, it was just a pumpkin.
What did you do? Just a normal...
It was just a really good face.
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
Cool. To be fair, there were like 3 other people in the pumpkin carving competition, so it wasn't well attended.
Yeah, let's keep it off your profile. Yeah. All right, well, thank you for that. I wanted to start with a theme I've been thinking a lot about, and probably you guys have all been facing, and that is the needing to lead with clarity. It is so confusing right now. The macro environment, the internal environment, even AI, it's really hard to navigate. And one of the things I've been thinking about is, my guess is that there is a correlation between clarity and happiness. Yeah. And I'm just wondering if this is something that you've been digging into, and any tips or tricks you can give us as we're thinking about the importance of providing that clarity and conviction, especially right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think it gets to some of the stuff we were talking about mind wandering and kind of being not mindful. I think the lack of clarity, for me, looks like that image of like your head's everywhere. It's hard to figure out the priorities. It's hard to decide what to do. So I think finding strategies that can get you more grounded is powerful. I think a really big one, honestly, is finding ways to like acknowledge and access those negative emotions. I feel like part of our lack of clarity is trying to pretend, honestly, that stuff's not as bad as it is. That stuff's not as confusing as it is, that it's not changing as fast as it is, that we're just fine. And I think taking a breath to be like, it is normal to feel this overwhelmed right now, that can actually take a lot of the pressure off. I also think it's a fabulous strategy as a leader with clarity, because I think when you embody that, when you share that insight with your team, it lets them kind of take the load off their shoulders and say, okay, it makes sense that I'm going through this too. I think a danger that nonprofit leaders sometimes get into is trying to pretend that things are fine because you wish it was fine so much and you don't want to let on that things are bad. And I think that can scare especially some of the younger members of our team who are looking up to us and don't want to feel like they're signing up for a life of being burned out, don't want to sign up for a life kind of denying the realities of the situation. And so I think when you say, you know what, this is really hard right now, this is tough right now, here are strategies I'm going to use to allow that and get through that, be incredibly freeing.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the power of vulnerability cannot be overstated. Yeah. All right, so moving on to skills, which is something LinkedIn thinks and talks and shares a ton about. And we've been doing lots of research to identify what are the most in-demand skills now and what we predict in the future. And one of the things we like to say, well, we know that by 2030, 70% of the skills required in your job will likely change. So we would like to say that even if you're not changing your job is changing on you. And one of the sort of interesting insights that maybe is counterintuitive is the most in-demand skills actually are the most human skills. Yes, AI fluency and some of those other technical skills do make the list, but the ones at the top are the uniquely human: communication, leadership skills, and resilience.
Yeah.
So I wanted to hear more from you about how you think about that, or what does that resonate, first of all, and what else are you seeing in some of these skills, and how I loved how happiness, productivity were so critical in the workplace, but if you can say more about the role resilience plays to also drive some of that productivity.
Yeah. I think the next 5 years, what we're going to see in the workplace is a revolution in how we think about well-being. It is no longer going to be a nice to have, it's going to be a need to have. And I say that not just because I would love that to be true, that workplaces were places where folks could be happy and thrive and flourish. I say that because I'm watching the science come out and I'm seeing study after study show the causal effects of happiness at work. There's this one lovely study by the University of Oxford that was asking the question, what does different traits at work predict? And they particularly looked at happiness. And they found that not only does happiness predict kind of performance in the way that I was talking about, they took it one step up, not just performance at the individual level, they looked at the corporation level. This was in for-profit corporations that had stock portfolios they could look at. So they said, let's take data on happiness at work across 5,000 different companies, and then use that to predict stock performance across those 5,000 companies. What did they find? Not only is there a super strong correlation between happiness at work and your stock performance as a company, they also find that if you were to kind of make a new metric, one that's not in the Wall Street Journal, instead of like the NASDAQ or the Dow Jones, you picked the top 100 happiest companies, that metric would actually outpredict the Dow Jones and the NASDAQ and all the other stuff. Like if you just invested in those companies at any time in the economic cycle, you'd make most money. That's what you didn't expect from the happiness lady, like investment advice, but go for it, invest in the happiness companies. But the point is that it's not a nice to have, this is a need to have, right? I think we're gonna learn that this is gonna be as important as these other kinds of skills, which I think is really critical. And the study is actually very relevant for some of the work that you did, because the researchers then asked, wow, if happiness at work matters so much for stock performance, we could ask the question, what predicts happiness at work?
Yeah.
None of the things so not salary, not actually having a good manager, so you all are off the hook. It's actually a sense of belonging at work. It's that you feel your work matters. You feel that there are people at your organization that think your work matters. And the third part is a yes or no question. Do you have a best friend at work? Those things predict happiness at work, which predict how much money your company is making. Again, none of the stuff that they teach in business schools, it's all the human stuff you're talking about.
well, your example about the janitor in your presentation really resonated with me. Back to some of the research on purpose, that purpose-driven people are happier and more productive. That totally resonates, makes sense.
Totally.
So back to kind of where you ended your presentation about the correlation, or the importance of time.
Yeah.
And you kind of referenced this at the end, that one of the promises of the AI, that it takes the proverbial 12 hats I think Michele talked about in the earlier presentation, that it takes some of those hats and puts them to the side, that gives you more time to focus on what matters most for your organization. So I just wanted to dig more into that. Like, how optimistic are you about that? And to the extent that AI can remove some of the madness and give us more time to focus on what matters more. It feels like that's a win-win.
I think it's a huge win-win. And I say this as someone who is was not actually an optimist about AI. I admit it. I'm kind of a Luddite. I'm like the person who uses the old tech, like my computer's old, and I use the old program that I learned in 2004, and I keep, like I'm that person. And so I was skeptical, but I've watched in my own workflow how much it just speeds things up, making a newsletter, doing a spell check, checking for references, using it as a search engine. It's just speeding things up. And that can sometimes mean a little bit of extra time confetti that used well, I can use correctly. Is AI gonna change the work week? And I don't know, but it definitely has given me those little moments of time confetti that put to good use can be great. And so I think that's the framing that I found really powerful, is this is a time-saving tool, not so I can take on more of the BS at work, so I can think about good ways to use the time. And I think this is another spot. I mentioned the kind of food example, right? If you're getting takeout, kind of reframe how much time did I save? This is a great use of your AI tools. Notice, I probably pre-AI, that would have taken me 20 minutes, took me 12. What am I gonna do with that other 8 minutes? And how can I invest it better?
And it's super consistent with what our research is showing in the most in-demand skills, that if AI can get rid of the stuff that is not that interesting to do and give you the time to focus on the things that really are uniquely human and cannot be replaced, that is what makes us more productive and happy. All right, unfortunately, that is the end of our fireside chat. Join me in a huge round of applause for Dr. Laurie Santos.
Welcome back, everyone. It's great to see everyone here for day 2, and huge welcome to you, Mustafa. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having me, and welcome everybody in the room, and thanks for being here. And I hope it's been a useful 24 hours. It sounds like from Naria, everyone's as high energy as her, so that was pretty awesome to see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were just talking earlier that, we've got a fabulous audience, both in the room and online today. We've got about 1,500 global nonprofit leaders in the room. We've got a few thousand joining us online, and, we are tremendously grateful for everybody prioritising their time and resources to be with us, over these 2 days. It's a particularly tumultuous time in the sector, and, nonprofits are under tremendous pressure, more pressure than ever before, and I think it says a lot that people are here to learn more about technology and AI and what it can mean for the sector. And I know that that's something that is top of mind for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think we're all looking at the last few months of change, with huge concern and anxiety, but also recognizing that it's a transformation that is coming, and I think that's one of the things I've been focused on for many years, is just recognizing that we are about to go through, I think, one of the most significant transitions in our lifetimes in terms of how technology is going to change the way we work, the way we communicate, the way we organize ourselves. And so the most important thing to do there is to really just confront that reality and educate ourselves in the best way we can around how to take advantage of it.
So perhaps, backing up a little bit, as Naria said, you've had a really interesting career, and, you've spanned working sort of grassroots nonprofit work. You've founded a nonprofit, you co-founded DeepMind, you've written a fabulous book, now helping shape AI at Microsoft, and really, really for the world. And we're seeing AI transforming industries at a really unprecedented pace. But how do you see AI's potential to tackle some of the, the world's biggest challenges that we're seeing, whether it's, poverty, whether it's education, healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess maybe it's helpful to take a step back and just really look at the big picture. What is the thing that has driven, so much of the value in our world and really created civilization? It is this power that we have in our minds to make sense of complicated environments, make predictions about how those environments might unfold, and then creatively intervene in those trajectories. And that sounds very abstract, but it is kind of, in essence, the fundamental feature that has enabled us to, create the world of science that has led to all the impact in technology, that has improved, on every metric you can think of over 2 centuries, human well-being and order and happiness in our civilization. And so, to me, the attraction over the last 20 years of working on AI is to try to, take what is powerful and beautiful about that and turn it into, a resource and a tool that is available to everybody, both at the individual level, the organizational level, at the government level, because it's that engine that has driven progress and productivity, and we're now about to make that, almost zero marginal cost relative to the kind of impact that it can have is kind of remarkable. So that's, I think, what's happening in this moment.
I love that. And yesterday, actually, when I was doing some welcome remarks, I actually had a slide with a quote of yours that I really love, where you said, technology for its own sake counts for nothing. What matters is how it feels to people and how it impacts societies. And I think non-profits deeply understand this because their work is very much about people. It's about relationships, it's about trust, it's about impact. And how do we think about leveraging all the goodness and the power of AI to really enhance these qualities as opposed to potentially undermining them?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of another inflection point, if you like. For the last few centuries, maybe even 400 years post-Enlightenment, the goal has been to sort of unlock new inventions as fast as possible. And, we almost without regard for consequences. We knew, we were just sort of overwhelmed with breakthroughs and science that was clearly, benefiting everybody. And now I think we're going to have to make some important decisions about the rate at which we unlock those breakthroughs and how they get deployed and who gets access to them. And I think we collectively as a species have learned so much over the last few decades of how technology impacts us really well and, where it causes third-degree effects that, we don't like. And so I think this time around we have to be hypersensitive to those third-degree consequences and be really in tune with, how does this actually affect people day to day? What does it make them feel? For too long, I think, in tech, the objective has been a very kind of simple optimization problem. Does it make something more efficient, right? Does it improve accuracy? And in some ways, that's very important, but probably too simplistic for where we're headed now. I mean, these are highly emotionally intelligent systems that are capable of lasting, meaningful relationships that are going to be, highly interactive and very consequential for individual lives, for culture, for society. And I think that is an important frame for thinking about how we actually shape this stuff, because we do have collectively a massive opportunity to shape it. Our collective values really will change, how things look by 2030 or 2035. And I think that's where we should be focusing our attention.
Yeah, and with the huge opportunity that's coming with this, it feels like just, new innovations almost, it feels like every week. There remains these complicated issues, which, you just touched on. And one of the things that, I know that nonprofits think about is data. And, AI is only as good as the data that it learns from. And so how do we ensure that AI is equitable and doesn't reinforce existing biases?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I feel, I think, justifiably optimistic on this front. When you look back at the last 4 or 5 years of progress in AI, it's pretty clear that with each order of magnitude new compute that you add, so as you put 10 times more data and compute into the hopper, you actually get models which aren't just more accurate, they're easier to control. So they're more responsive to product design, essentially, which should also be understood as values design. So it's no longer the case that, you know, there's a one-to-one mapping between bad data in and bad data out. Like that was a sort of old framing from 3 or 4 years ago. In fact, we largely, you know, sort of, I think, have made so much progress on the bias question today that it's now up to people who use the technology, you know, and actually deploy it day to day to stylistically control how it responds in different settings, right? Which is a very, very significant breakthrough. It's not like these are sort of just going to be out of control. And I think we see this, you know, in multiple settings. This, you know, 2 years ago, people would say, well, these models are never going to be emotionally intelligent. They're just going to be factually accurate. They're going to have really good IQ. It's very clear now that they're actually kinder, more empathetic, more disciplined, more even-handed, more respectful, you know, more boundaried, actually, than, you know, someone else might be in a very high-octane situation where a user is, you know, wanting to explore a very sensitive topic to do with race or gender or immigration. And actually, these models do an incredible job of handling those very complex, you know, long conversations. So I think it's an indication that the raw materials, you know, in these LLMs are of such high quality now that the real challenge for us, once again, is as individuals and organizations that use them and put them into practice, figuring out what do we want? What are our boundaries? What are our organization's values? And you know, I'm pretty confident that they'll be able to, you know, the models will be able to reflect those.
And I think that speaks to, you know, the broad topic of diffusion and how important it is that, you know, we try and get this technology and the skills to use it into, you know, the hands of people around the world, and especially, you know, this audience that can help us think about, you know, the ways to leverage this technology in the best possible ways. And, you know, as we think about AI enabling non-technology users to build solutions, you know, I think that can be really transformational. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the diffusion story has never been faster and cheaper compared to any other technology. Not radio, not TV, not electricity, not cars. I mean, we've basically gone from, you know, these models costing $1 billion for 2 or 3 private, you know, companies to be able to build 5 years ago to now being available to absolutely everybody. I mean, GPT-3 is now available in open source at the same standard, and it can sit on your phone 3 years later. So we've never seen a rate of diffusion faster than this in any other technology to go from, you know, absolute peak to wide access. And that's actually very, very encouraging because in addition to the rate of diffusion coming down, the rate of complexity of use has come down, right? So just in a prompt with 3 paragraphs, you can stylistically control it. You can give it a specific bounded task of a scope of activity that you want. And you can actually experiment with that in, you know, 10 minutes, writing a prompt, seeing the output, executing it on your own private data through RAG or retrieval augmented generation, and then iterate. And so that feedback cycle, you don't have to be an engineer anymore. You don't even have to be a product manager. You don't have to have any expertise whatsoever, specialist expertise in technology. So I think that is like way beyond the low code, no code excitement that we've had over the last few years that anybody can build a website or an app, which is also awesome. So I think that's very empowering because I'm not a computer scientist, right? And I've spent like 15 or 20 years learning the language of computer science and learning to work with people in machine learning and really getting my PhD in production, like, you know, hands-on working with people. And now there are plenty of people just like me who don't need to go through any of that sort of 15 years experience. They can really just get in the weeds straight away. I think that's very, very exciting from addressing this question of, you know, what are the values of this technology and how do we shape it? And so, you know, my sort of major encouragement is that people adopt it very, very quickly, integrate it as a primary part of your workflow, should be one of the first things that you think every day. Just as you have an instinct to go to email, you should have an instinct to go to, you know, pick a chatbot or an AI or an underlying model that you prompt. You know, get your hands on it because it is like sculpture. You have to get your hands dirty, it has to go wrong, you have to make mistakes, you have to get an intuition for what it's good at and what it's not. And just one more thing on that. in order to get a good intuition of the performance of a model, I always suggest to people, pick a topic that you know lots about. Like, what is your, favorite band that you know inside out, or your professional expertise, and have a really long, drawn-out conversation with each one of the models. Because what you'll see is moments of surprise and delight, because it will teach you something really niche and cool, and then moments of elementary errors. And that's important too, because then you'll see the boundaries and limitations, you'll see the quirks, you'll see the slightly different personality styles, the different formatting. And I think that gets everybody, that's just an easy way to get started and get some familiarity with what these things can do.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the importance of AI skilling, which we were talking a little bit about earlier, and it's going to be really key. Both AI fluency. I think everybody's going to need some degree of AI fluency, whatever role they have. But I think there's so much that we need to learn about, like what are the AI skills of the future in terms of AI engineering, AI systems engineering. I think we still need to learn a lot about what those are.
Yeah, and now everybody is going to have a very personalized, highly accurate, basically a co-pilot or an AI in your pocket that is a world expert on every topic. So the barrier to entry to learning and knowledge has literally never been lower. You no longer need to go through 10 blue links and browse on the web and parse different information, hierarchies, and read, third-party content. You can really get it in a style that is optimized for your, learning, and everyone wants to learn slightly differently.
I had a couple of people yesterday asking and talking about deep research and just even how transformational that's been. Can you just say a little bit about that development?
Yeah, I mean, it's magical. I mean, it really does feel remarkable. Just the length and the way that knowledge is organized, I think is, it's close to what I would expect from a, sort of PhD researcher in terms of how thorough and structured the knowledge is. The other thing that I think is very cool that is worth people checking out is, I don't know, maybe going on YouTube rather than doing it yourself, but just looking at the chain of thought reasoning in some of these models. So chain of thought is this inner monologue where before giving an answer, the model asks itself a series of questions and runs through a bunch of reasoning steps to help develop the appropriateness of the final answer that it gives. It's kind of like this inner monologue or working memory, and it is staggering. Like, I think it is as important a breakthrough as the arrival of GPT-3. I think it's the next thing, because you can start to see why a certain output has been produced and how did it trade off these different priorities with respect to its stylistic guidance, right? So it's referring back to what was my teaching, what are the rules of the road, what are my boundaries, what is this person looking for in this setting, what had they asked for previously, and what should I infer about how that ask has now changed. So you can start to see all the components that are going into the reasoning mix, and I think, and then it produces a much better quality output most of the time. And then I think over time, you'll be able to, as a designer and user of these technologies, tweak that inner monologue. So it'll come back to you in the middle of producing a deep research output and check in with you and be like, was this what you were looking for? Or would you prefer something more like that? Do you like lots of images, or would you like it structured in bullet points? Or how about I produce a podcast for you? So before producing that high quality output, it'll check in with you and calibrate. And that's where it will start to feel like a true partner. That's what I mean by AI companion. To me, everyone's going to have an AI companion, this kind of conciliary, this aid, this coach, a thought partner for helping you to kind of navigate life.
I remember hearing you speak maybe a couple of years ago, and you said something like, think about in years to come when you might go and apply for a job. It's not just you applying for your job. It's you and your co-pilot in your back pocket, which I was like, wow, like how to think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I think you're going to, you and your AI over time are going to form like a duo, because it's almost like a second memory. It's going to be a store of your knowledge, and that, in that sense, I think is going to be massively amplifying, because just as we don't bother remembering telephone numbers anymore and we don't use the A to Z, and yes, it's true that we lose something by not knowing how to navigate around the physical world, and that would be awesome, but just as the calculator required us not to have to learn from tables and an abacus, I mean, this is just the next evolution, and I think that with a bunch of caveats around how we control it, I think it's going to be pretty incredible to have that level of knowledge and capability in your pocket.
Yeah, we were talking yesterday that even in the last 2 years since the launch of generative AI, we've really seen organisations adopt this technology, and there's some incredible innovations. And you travel the world. I know you speak to a lot of non-profits, a lot of humanitarian organisations. Maybe you could share a couple of examples of where you're seeing organisations leverage AI to support their missions.
I mean, the most elementary version is to do retrieval over all of your funding documents and your operational documents. I mean, there's now sort of no excuse for not being able to bring that material to life. There's no longer a need to sort of go and read the source material of PDFs and RFIs as your first stop. They'll still be in the citations, they'll be referenced, but all of that material should now dynamically come to life as you interact with it, mediated through your AI or your co-pilot. So I think that's the kind of level one. And huge efficiencies, huge advantages to just having that knowledge at your fingertips and bringing it to life. The second thing I think is in actual service delivery. Like I started a non-profit 20-ish years ago now with 2 or 3 other people. And it was a telephone counseling service that was really basically working with young people like me. I was about 20 at the time, 19, and trying to deliver faith and culturally sensitive counseling in a secular, sort of non-judgmental way. And it's very clear to me now that these models are able to do that, as well as, if not better than, your average helpline trainee. And so I saw a couple of implementations where in real time, during the conversation, a, telephone call center operator is being given, suggestions on how to respond in a slightly more empathetic way, or reminders of what was talked about in the last conversation, or, signposting to other services that this person might find helpful, or, that kind of thing. So I can definitely see it taking a pretty active role in frontline delivery.
If you were, you are a visionary in AI, and if we were sitting here in not 1 year's time, but maybe 5 years' time, how do you hope that AI has really transformed the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, I think there is a chance that this is a moment where the sector could pivot to have a revival, to be, super vibrant and attract more and more talent into the sector, knowing that, all of the bits of administration and bureaucracy that make it feel, frustrating or unappealing to be part of a big system really get pushed away. And so that there should be way more time for frontline service delivery and really solving the problems that everybody comes into the sector to really address, and not be sort of drowned out by, spending 30, 40% of our time or more in administration, grant management, funding, running the organizations, and so on. I think a lot of that gets pushed into the background, and hopefully that means more time for real service delivery.
I think that's right, and we heard from a couple of nonprofits yesterday who are, already seeing how AI can help free up time for people to do what people can do best. Just perhaps to end on a couple of more fun questions. What's sort of 1 or 2 ways that you use AI in your everyday? Whether it's work or personal.
Yesterday, we have been flighting a feature called Copilot Vision. And you go into Copilot, start a voice conversation, and you can ask Copilot to put on goggles, and it can see everything in your environment and talk to you about it in real time. It's basically like having a smart person there. Wow. And it was just unbelievable. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I pointed it at the mirror, and it's like talking about what I'm wearing and like guessing where I bought it from and talking to me about how I like it.
Did you get a thumbs up?
I did. Yeah, it's very positive. Although I did ask it to roast me as well. So it roasted my sneakers. I won't share it. It was quite embarrassing. I was like, oh, that was pretty good.
Wow.
Seriously. And then I like pointed it at this returns label for a box that I was sending back. And I was like, do I need to pay for the postage for this? Because I couldn't figure it out. And it was like, oh yeah, if you look carefully, there's a P/P in the bottom right-hand corner, which means postage paid. I was like, cool. That's actually really helpful. So yeah, try it out. Copilot Vision is awesome. It's only available to like 20% of people at the moment, but in a week or so, it'll be 100% availability. So you might get lucky and be able to try it today.
That's amazing. I think we need like a Mustafa's, weekly top tips or something like that. And just for a last question, I'm going to channel our LinkedIn colleagues here who always ask, what is one thing that you don't have on your LinkedIn profile?
That I don't have? What does that mean? Like a job that I've done that I've...
No, it's just something about you that isn't on your LinkedIn profile.
Oh, there's loads of things. I don't really know. What kind of thing would it be? I guess all the sports that I play. I mean, I'm quite into going to the gym, rock climbing, and kickboxing. It's not on there.
Well, that's cool. It's great. Well, we're out of time, but just please join me in thanking Mustafa. And Mustafa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot. That was great.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So thank you, for joining. And I see we do have Strive up on the screen, and hopefully everyone can see him okay. Big thank you to Strive. Really, really appreciate you making the time and joining us remotely. Some of us here on stage do phone calls, and some of us do Teams calls. So we're doing the team calls here today. Strive, thank you so much for joining, and Amma, thank you so much for making the long journey here today, and it's been wonderful to get to know you, and I'm very excited for this conversation. So, Narya teed up what we're going to talk about is really focused on innovation and impact in the Global South. And when we think about the Global South, many of you here in the room probably know the statistic that 85% of the world's population lives in the Global South. So if we think back to the electricity grid, the visual map that we saw yesterday, Narya referenced this as well, the majority of the low-density areas on the map were situated in the Global South. So there's tremendous opportunity, but there's also tremendous challenges that we need to overcome. And really what we're going to talk about today is how we can get ahead of some of those challenges. Before we go into the conversation, I wanted to talk about why this is also personally, for me, dear to my heart. As someone who worked in the development sector in India, in Tanzania, I've seen firsthand some of the creativity, the resilience, and the vast opportunity that exists in the Global South. So very excited to have some visionary leaders here with us today. So I'm going to start off with a question on technology. So we're going to talk about what the outlook for technology looks like. So Strive, we're going to start with you. And Strive, you may not be able to see the room. There's about 1,500 people here in the room today, and there's a lot of energy and eagerness to hear what you're saying. I want to ask you, Strive, from your vantage point, with all of the work you've done, leading really from mobile connectivity all the way to the AI transformation work that you're doing now. We did catch some of the big announcements that you made last week with NVIDIA. We wanted to ask you, what do you see as the outlook for technology transformation? What do you see on the horizon in terms of the big opportunities, the big trends when it comes to technology?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. It's a great honor to be able to join you. I'm really sorry about the mishap in my travel, which made it difficult for me to be with you. I would have loved to enjoy some of that energy, and it's an honor to share a platform with you. With respect to your question about what we are seeing, coming after Suleyman, it's a bit intimidating. But anyhow, look, we're all at ground zero. And the challenges, the opportunities, the fears, whatever it is that people are feeling in other parts of the world, that's how Africa also sees it. Because we're all really connected. And we are probably more optimistic than most, because we're a continent where the mean age is 19.7. So we're young. We have a lot of young people. And a lot of our young people are really digital natives. When I was scrambling around trying to build mobile networks 30 years ago, they weren't born, half of our population. So they're digital natives. They're ready, they're hungry, they're waiting for this. So Africa's, want to be part of this, and it's going to be part of this.
I think that's fantastic. And to something Mustafa said in the previous discussion as well, really it's nothing if it's not for everyone. And that's really, I know what you're talking about as well. So Amma, over to you. Tell us a little bit about your view on technology. We got a glimpse of it in the video. Tell us how you're using technology for your organization and also for the people and communities that you're serving.
From redefining social structures and to cultural frameworks and even the phase and pace of economic activities, the Global South is reckoning with technology. Like Strive said, our population is young, and so we know firsthand what it feels like not to feel the full effects, both the economic and social benefits that technology has promised to bring to us. But we have hope, because we have seen firsthand what technology is able to do on the continent. I am privileged to work with Opportunity International in rural communities, from Barabanki in India to Dedza in Malawi. And I have seen firsthand what technology is doing with regards to changing the economic livelihoods of the men and especially the women that we serve. For us at Opportunity International, we do not just deploy technology. Our engineering team works to give us technology that is made around the lived experiences of our clients. So, for example, our engineering team has expertise in human-centered design methodologies. And this is where I'm going to say full disclosure. We borrowed that methodology from Microsoft. And our engineering team is made up of individuals with expertise from Microsoft itself. But for us, it's on a shoestring. We can't afford your numbers. So from Poesini, who is somewhere in the audience, to our CTO, Greg Nelson, who comes with over 20 years of experience, we are deploying technology that speaks the needs of our clients. A few weeks ago, spent 4 weeks in the field, basically revalidating some of the information that we have from smallholder farmers to teachers and proprietors in the field that we give this technology to. Charity begins at home for us. So it means that for us to improve our own AI fluency within our organization, we start in-house. We have an impact accelerator called the CoLab. It's really simple. Once a year, the whole global team of Opportunity International comes together. It doesn't matter your time zone. And we think of ideas that would change the lives of the communities that we serve. Our engineering team then takes these ideas. Last year, when we did it for the first time, we had our staff members from all over the world produce over 100 ideas. Just last 2 weeks, they came up with 200 ideas on how we can use AI to solve the pressing need of the women that I work with in the fields of Malawi. These ideas are then whittled down to about 3 or 4. Currently, we have about 4 main ideas that affect the lives of nano and micro entrepreneurs, smallholder farmers like the video that you just saw, and 1 for teachers, and also for school proprietors. For us, Anu, what we have seen technology do is that it has helped us with skill. We are now able to reach more people faster. It has also given us the possibility to do immediate impact measurement. I now do not have to wait for, a month to go back to the field to be able to understand how the technology is impacting the clients. In this regard, we also have humans in the loop, meaning that our FSA, or our Farmer Support Network, which is basically individuals who are farmers within the communities that we work in, who are deploying this technology, interact with the clients that we serve. And then on the back end, Paul and Rich and the rest of the team are able to get real-life data, analyze it, look at the themes, and for the non-techie person like me in the room who's a social scientist, then we are able to have real discussion about how then do we bring the needs of these people to the fore and keep on tweaking our digital products to serve them. Again, using human-centered design, our clients are the center of our design and deployment process.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on something you said. You mentioned, you use the word clients a lot, and I found that very interesting. Tell us about why you say, why you call them clients.
I know for us at Opportunity International, we are serving communities that have age-old practices. I'll give an example. I grew up in the market in Accra, Ghana. My mother was a market woman, and they had what we called in that time susu. If you go to the DRC, it's called tontines. These are informal savings mechanisms where women in a group of about 5 to 10 or more come together, pool their monies together, loan to themselves, or help each other out when they are in trouble. This system predates me. And if you look across the whole world, from Malaysia all the way to South Africa, they have such systems. What I do in my role is that I look for ways in which to augment what is already existing within these spaces. We serve them, and so they are our client at Opportunity International. And I make sure that having that at the back of my mind, I bring tools that will augment them, basically catalyze their strengths, and help them transform. I give the example of Anne, the farmer in the video. She knows how to farm. She's been doing for more years than I have been born. And what she knows how to do, all I do is bring technology so that with issues like climate change, she's able to jump over those hurdles and get the information she needs to make an informed decision. Most times, what the app tells them is basically validating information they already know. And that's nice to see.
I think that is so fantastic. And first of all, we're going to use the word clients a lot more. I love that. And also just putting the power in the hands of the, power of the technology in the hands of the people and the community. So that's amazing. Strive, we're going to go to you, and we're going to switch gears a little bit to talk about skills and workforce and youth in particular. And by the way, I see Strive here, and I know you all see Strive there, but Strive, can see me as seeing him, so this is why I'm looking here. So when we talk about youth, 42% of the world's youth by 2030 is going to be in Africa. So, tremendous potential there. Strive, you do so much work mentoring individuals, young entrepreneurs across Africa and across the global south. Tell us from your experience, when we think about skills that are needed today, what are some of the skills that are rising to the top in your mind that this young talent needs to be able to build to be resilient for this AI economy?
No, thank you for that. I think first and foremost, for Africa to tap that youth dividend, it has to skill up these young people. Our greatest challenge is creating jobs for them. And so we have to look to these technological breakthroughs, like AI, as tools to speed up and accelerate skills development. And really, this is an area we're very excited about because it's part of the partnership area we've worked with Microsoft for many, many years. I mean, most people, when they think of me in philanthropy, they think of me in my work with my family foundation and Gates and other, Rockefeller and other areas where I've worked. But at the company level, we've worked with Microsoft for decades in the areas of skills training, helping young people access technology. We did an amazing project in Kenya with Microsoft to use the white space in Spectrum to help rural access connectivity for more than 200,000 small business people. Because for young people in Africa, everyone is a small business. You're not trained to get a job. You're trained to become an entrepreneur. If you leave school and you're looking for a job, you're not going to get one. But if you go out and you hustle and you bring your friends together, so what we need to fuel that with is skills. Skills, core skills in digital areas, core skills in entrepreneurship, and enabling them to access resources to scale what they're doing. These are challenges that we'll face both as philanthropists, but also as policymakers, because much of this will have to happen within the African states themselves. How do you mobilize the resources so that they can access these? Our challenge today is, you in America, in Silicon Valley, if a young person has a great idea, they can access venture capital, seed capital. The term is not even known by most African policymakers. So we haven't created that ecosystem yet. But we're seeing early interest in this area. We have to accelerate that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Strive. And really, there's this opportunity to accelerate the youth dividend, as you called it, and build the skills capacity of the entire ecosystem. Amma, over to you in terms of the same question around skills and education. What are you seeing as some of the skills that are rising to the top?
I know firsthand, like Strive said, in Africa, everybody is a business person. For the clients that we serve, last week I was in Ghana and I was meeting the proprietor of a low-cost school. She runs her low-cost school private, but at the same time, she also consults for another low-cost school. So she has about 2 or 3 jobs. And I see this across. So for us at Opportunity International, ensuring that we are deploying technology that helps improve the economic livelihoods of the people that we serve is very important. On the education question, Africa really needs for its youth to be able to be future ready, requires for us to have strong education reforms, like Strive was saying. But there are fundamental issues first. A lot of the children are out of the classrooms. Our education finance team does a lot of research, and recently, from one of the reports that we had, 1 in 5 of school-going age children are not in the classroom. Fundamental issue. Again, the data is showing us that there is a need for 38 million extra seats through to 2026. Why are children not in the classroom first to begin with? What are the barriers that are holding up this very vital lifeline for the continent? The way we always do it at Opportunity International is to go back to the community and find ways and means in which we can uplift individuals in there so they can also be the solution that we are looking for. So we work with individuals like Mr. Jimmy in Lugazi in Uganda. He has built a low-cost private school that takes on the children in that community. He also has a cow that he milks every day at 5 a.m. so the kids who come to the school can have a nutritious meal together with the porridge millet that they are drinking. This is how we are deploying technology to help Mr. Jimmy. We have an AI-powered tool that enables him to be able to manage his school effectively. For teachers like Anne in the DRC, we have another tool using technology that helps her be able to enjoy time affluent. In this case, it means that she has a tool that helps her to be able to lesson plan, saves her extra times to be able to support children in her classroom who have special needs. We cannot talk about equipping children for tomorrow's jobs when they are not in the classrooms today. And for us, that is vital.
Yeah, I think that is powerful. I think so powerful. And really, it's interesting because to equip the students, we need to equip the teachers, and we need to equip the whole ecosystem that is supporting them. So
the children are excited. You would go into schools in Ghana, and at the back of their textbook, there's a QR code. The kids will clamor for their teacher's one phone so they can scan the back of this book and be able to see what is happening. So there's interest. But the challenge is, if they are not in the classroom, then how do you build that skill set? If that child cannot read and write at the very basic level, then as a continent, the most important part of our future, which is our human resource, is being wasted.
yeah, absolutely. And you spoke of time affluence. We are currently a little time famished, so we're going to do two quick lightning round questions. Yes. Maybe we can combine them. I'm going to ask it together. So first is when we think about, I think you and Strive, you and Strive both talked about really the ecosystem and the whole set of partners that we need to bring together to be able to enable this work. So talk us through who you see if you had, the ability to devise your most ideal partnership table, who would you bring to the table? Who is often missed that we need to be considering? And then on a similar note, the second part of this question is, what is your advice to the nonprofits here, the nonprofit leaders that are in the room? And we'll close out with that. What's your kind of one piece of advice that if you wanted to offer them, especially as they think about how they can use technology to transform their impact? So Strive will go to you, and then we'll go to Amma after.
Sure. Look, first of all, I'm extremely grateful to Microsoft for organizing this profound discussion. And really, I'll turn to them as a partner, because Microsoft is, in many ways, an American company that exemplifies the best of global companies working in Africa. Brad was recently in South Africa and announced a program to skill up 1 million young Africans. This is on top of the investment that they have been doing. This is the most important aspect. We've got to invest in Africa. Without the digital infrastructure, for instance, putting in the data centers that will house our cloud, our AI infrastructure, we can talk about things until the cows come home. What's important is that we have to bring into the room more investment into the African continent. We have the lowest investment in the world. We get, as I've said many times, the FDI into Africa is less than Singapore. Yet we have 1.3 billion people. So we have to invest. So first and foremost, it's great to see companies like Microsoft stepping up to the plate, beginning to do real investments, as well as having the heart, because of the type of people they have on the ground, to look at some of the ways in which their technologies can be leveraged to help those who can't normally access. I'll give you an example. With Microsoft, we developed something called Cloud Mania, which was a platform to help small businesses in Africa access Microsoft products. Until then, they thought they were just for big companies. But today, we have thousands of small businesses beginning to access Microsoft products. This is what we need to do, because we've got to create prosperity in Africa. If you have prosperity, a lot of the challenges we face will be easier to tackle. So that's would really be my pitch, because you're all here. So please, help us build on that investment.
Thank you so much, Strive. I think intentional investment, as you said, and the heart that goes with it as well.
I mean, for us, partnership is really critical, because then you're able to bring resources, expertise, and experience. We are humble. We are not a tech company. So when it gets to the point where we know that we need the help, we reach out to like-minded organizations that can support us in our need to be able to take our tools to reach the Annas of the world, the Mr. Jims of the world. I'll give you an example. We have the Ministry of Malawi's agricultural ministry to thank so much for our AI-powered tool, because they gave us authoritative data to feed to our AI so that when the Malawian farmers look at it, the information is specific to their context. We did the same thing in Ghana, working with the Ghana Development Bank and also GERSEL, which is a quasi-government institution, to work with farmers in the rice value chain. And then we also had a telco partnership. Currently, we are testing our AI tool in Kenya together with the biggest telecommunications company in Kenya, Safaricom's Digifarm. We know that it takes time to build these partnerships, finding mission-aligned institutions that are willing to come to the table and to do the work. To answer your question about which table I'll build, I will first put the people that we serve at the head of that table. Too many times as non-for-profits, we forget about the people that we serve. In terms of other stakeholders I'll put at the table, you know what? I will not even think about people. I'll think about the kind of character traits I'd like at the table. I'd like people to come to that table with respect, with humility, with a can-do attitude, because working in Africa and trying to deploy technology, Strive will tell you, it's a challenge, because we have a huge infrastructure deficit, and we also deal with issues of digital illiteracy. So come to that table with respect. Come to that table with humility. Make sure the people that we are serving are sitting at the head of that table. And finally, please let us develop tools that have transformational change for the people that we are going to serve, because it's important. If I take tools that do not work to those communities, the next time they see me coming, they would stone me.
I think that is a great note to end on, and I know we're out of time, but we have the opportunity to build our own partnership tables here, so take that opportunity while we do that.
And Anu, as you can see, like I've always said, it's so important to look at the clients that we serve. These women know how to build partnerships. They know how to pool their resources together. They know how to get each other to help them with their farming. And I think as a non-profits in this room, we are a strong collective. There is so much happening in our world today that, has a lot of us wondering what is going to happen next. I think it's a great opportunity for us to reimagine the work that we are doing. Look at the people that we serve through famine, through cyclones, through wars. They are still finding opportunities to rise. I'm an Akan woman. I'm loud, obviously. But there is a chant that I grew up as Ghanaians that we do, where we basically leverage the strength of the collective and the voice. And so if you ever watch a football team in Ghana play, you hear somebody say, "Cho boy," and the response is yay. I want you all to do this with me, because you have been sitting for too long. So let's rise. Everybody come with me. When I call out, "Cho boy," I want you to respond yay. I want you to take this back to your boardrooms and to your offices, so that when times get hard, remember the loud Akan woman who said you need to reimagine the way you work. You want to try it? Yeah. Cho boy! Yay! Cho boy! Yay! Cho boy! Yay! Thank you so much for indulging me. You are fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Strive. Thank you, Amma. That was a pleasure. Thank you.
Jeffrey Hammerbacher was one of the first data scientists in the industry. He was the person that put together the original Facebook data science team, and once said, "The best minds of my generation are thinking how to get people click on ads." And this is true and sad at the same time. We live in a world where millions of children die before their 5th birthday, hundreds of millions are affected by climate, and 1.3 billion people live with a severe disability. The world needs all the help it can get. And AI and technology cannot solve all these problems, but can help some of these problems. The challenge is that the organizations and governments that are working to try to solve these problems usually do not have the capacity or structure to hire and retain this talent. What is also true, that maybe Hammerbacher didn't fully consider, is that predicting which children have higher chances of infant mortality and predicting which customer will click on your ads, even if these two problems cannot be further apart from a societal point of view. From a pure AI and data science perspective, these problems are basically the same problem, which means that if in your teams you have people that are really good making sure people click on your ads, you can use that same talent to help the world. That's what my team does. We work with organizations and governments around the world, bringing our AI expertise, and we partner with subject matter experts. We are usually not subject matter experts on the problem that we are solving. We are subject matter experts on AI, and we partner with subject matter experts to help them solve some of the problems. Today, I'm going to be covering some of the lessons in the last 6 years working in these labs. The first one is, as humans, we naturally gravitate towards focusing on negative news. And this is likely happened because of evolution. Our ancestors, the ones that were more focused on good news, those didn't make it. And that's, from an evolution perspective, that's why we are so much focused on bad news, which from an evolution perspective helps, but we also need to understand that because of that, we often adopt a more pessimistic outlook of the world. When we look at metrics, in the last 100 years, a lot of these metrics have significantly improved decade after decade after decade, from infant mortality to people living in extreme poverty to areas like global literacy rate. All of these metrics have been moving in the right direction. Sometimes it's difficult when you look at the news to understand how much progress we have made. We also need to understand that for some world problems, relying on AI is the only option we have. Retinopathy of prematurity is the leading cause of blindness in infants around the world. This is a disease that didn't exist a few decades ago, but we're seeing a huge growth, now particularly affecting areas like Latin America or Sub-Saharan Africa. And the reason this didn't exist and we're now seeing a huge increase is a result of good news. This ROP affects very small premature babies that before they wouldn't have a chance to survive. Now, because of improvements in health and healthcare, more and more of these babies are surviving. And because of that, we are seeing more of these cases. What is the challenge for the world? We only have 200,000 ophthalmologists, 10,000 of which are pediatric ophthalmologists. Even if we do magic and we distribute them perfectly around the world, and they work only on doing diagnostics of ROP, we would not have enough ophthalmologists to do this work. A lot of the countries where we are seeing an increase in ROP cases, sometimes they might have even one pediatric ophthalmology to diagnose ROP. And this is why we've been working with amazing doctors in Mexico, in Colombia, in Argentina, where they have dedicated their life to help make sure that these babies are not blind and to help do diagnostics, but they know that there are not enough of them to do these diagnostics. As part of that, we have designed an AI model that can run on a smartphone and use just one lens, like this one here. And this model can, by just taking a video of the child, it will extract the information from that video and run an AI model to help do the diagnostics of ROP. This is something that we are now publishing in JAMA, and we want these doctors to eventually convert this into something that they can use. This is a problem where AI is not just a solution, but is the only solution we have. We also learn that as humans, we are addicted to complexity. We like complex projects and we like complex things. This is the reason we put a person on the moon before we added wheels to your luggage. And if we want to look intelligent and we want to impress people, there's nothing better than having very complex solutions. That works. If we want to have an impact in the world, your solutions need to be simple. Building simple solutions is hard, but it's more important to first recognize that addiction to complexity. Recognize that as managers, as project leaders, we will always gravitate to something more complex. That doesn't work. We also learn that we as humans can get, as humans and our models can get fooled by bias. Let me show you what I call the left-handed dilemma. Assuming that now when people invite you to this conference didn't ask you whether you're left-handed or right-handed, the distribution of left-handed people in the room will be similar to the distribution of left-handed people in the population, which means that 10% of you will be left-handed. And because seating is independent of left-handed or right-handed, we will have roughly the same amount of people left-handed on this side of the room than on this side of the room. Can you raise your hand if you're left-handed? You see, it works. I could work in Vegas. Unfortunately, I have really bad news for the left-handed people. There was a study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine that is the most prestigious medical journal in the world, where they took a random sample of people that died, asked their family members whether they were left-handed or right-handed, and found that being left-handed was associated with people who were left-handed died 9 years younger than right-handed people. If this was true, being left-handed would be as bad as smoking 120 cigarettes per day. So this is really bad for left-handed people. I'm sorry for that. The good news for the left-handed people was that what researchers didn't realize was that for a long period of time, there was a discrimination against being left-handed, and parents would force their kids to be right-handed. And I know that because my grandfather was one of them. He was forced to be right-handed. Eventually, people stopped doing that, and this generates this artificial increase in the left-handed population. This artificial increase in the left-handed population is the one that gives us the illusion that left-handed people die younger, when in reality, that's not the case. What's the challenge from an AI perspective? If you're a life insurance company and you have this data set and you're training this data set to understand how much you need to charge to your customers, the AI model will tell you that you need to charge more to the left-handed people, when in reality, that doesn't make any sense. The vast majority of the data we collect has some biases. If we don't understand the biases, our models will not be accurate. Some problems are more difficult than we anticipate. In 2014, many people, including me, by the way, said, in 10 years, we will have self-driving cars. In 2016, some of the most prestigious researchers in the world said people should stop training radiologists now. It's just completely obvious that within 5 years, deep learning is going to be better than radiologists. This is a picture this morning of some radiologists going to work in regular cars. It doesn't mean that we're not going to solve that problem, by the way. I have 3 kids. I hope that my kids will not need to drive. Unless you smoke, or you're left-handed, driving your car is going to be the most dangerous thing you're going to be doing in your life. So, of course, I want self-driving cars for my kids, but we also need to recognize that there are problems out there that are very difficult to solve, and we need to be humble about that. It doesn't mean we're not going to be solve them, but some of them are going to take us much more effort. AI can make a big difference, and we have witnessed this in the last 6 years for some of the work we have done. Whenever there is a natural disaster, my team partners with a satellite data company called Planet. We put a satellite on top of the natural disaster, we take pictures, we download that information, and we run AI models to build damage assessment maps. These are maps that indicate how many houses or structures were affected and where they are. This information is critical for teams on the ground to understand how many people do they need to send and to where. But the organizations that work with us, organizations like American Red Cross, organizations like UN agencies tell us that if we can provide this information within 24 hours, that information can help save lives. This is the Afghanistan earthquake, Libya flooding, that's the LA fires back in January, that's Lahaina fires. We have worked on this for many years now. We also work in the Ukraine war. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Ukraine was complaining that Russia was attacking schools, water facilities, and hospitals. these buildings are different from majority of other buildings because these buildings are protected by the Geneva Convention. Deliberate attack on some of these buildings can be considered a war crime. So what we did was, using satellites, we mapped every single school, water facility, and hospital across Ukraine. And not only we could identify whether they were destroyed or not, we could go back in time and understand when did that happen. We're working with in the Amazon in Colombia. It was taking 18 months to understand deforestation. We are now moving that to days. If you can have information about deforestation in days, you can use that information to send alerts. You can help the government take an action. And we are helping that. We are also using camera traps and acoustic data to help researchers understand and measure biodiversity in places like the Amazon or the Serengeti. We work in areas like medical imaging. Particularly, we've been working a lot in pancreatic cancer. If you look at the chart here, that's the survival rate, the 5-year survival rate. And if you look at the chart, for majority of the cancers, our medical healthcare and doctors and research have significantly improved the chances of you to survive. Pancreatic cancer is the one on the bottom. And even though we have made a small improvement, today, majority of the people that have a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer will not survive in 5 years. And the reason this happens is because when you detect pancreatic cancer, it's usually too late. What the doctors tell us is that if you can detect pancreatic cancer when it's less than 3 centimeters, you can have a surgery, and that can actually help treat it in a way that you can help save lives. But it's very difficult for doctors to look at that from a CT scan and identify cancer. We are using AI models to help these researchers do this. In areas like, there's 285 million people that are visually impaired in the world. And thanks to technology like AI models that run on technology like Be My Eyes, you have people that can use these phones now to navigate the world. There's a person that now works in Microsoft, and one time she posted this. She wasn't working in Microsoft at that point. She posted this online in LinkedIn. It says, as someone born blind, when I think back, I remember it as the year when AI vision got real. And she goes further. One of my favorite aspects of my new world of AI vision is how it evokes emotions in me. I've literally gone through and relabeled all my favorite pictures of my kid on my phone because of the level of nuance it communicates to me about her face in each one. This is a mom that for the first time can see the expressions of her daughter. There was a paper that was published last year where they took a sample of questions from patients and asked GPT-4 to answer them versus a medical doctor. What the paper showed, this was published in JAMA, was that the GPT was not only more accurate in many ways, but actually was showing more empathy in some of these questions. This doesn't mean that this technology is ready to use it like this, but it shows that it has the power to do it. We live in a world where 4 billion people, half of the world, do not have access to doctors. This technology can help. And we believe that in the next few years, we will see a huge improvement on areas like healthcare because of this technology. In our phones, we have more processing power than the one that was needed to put a person on the moon. There are very important problems out there that can and should be solved with data. We no longer have excuses. Thank you very much.